We must speak the truth about terror. Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories, malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves.
Huh? What happens? I tell you what happens. Blam!
I have a window that looks directly at the World Trade Center, and I saw...
No collusion!
Shit's getting way too complicated for me.
Welcome to the AnteDote Live. This is Jeremy Rothkushel.
And this is Greg McCarran.
And luckily this time I didn't talk over you or try to announce you for you. I apologize for that last time, my friend.
Well, you know, it's water under the bridge.
All right, thank you. And
I may secretly never let it go, but you won't know that one way or the other.
No, I mean, you can store it like Brendan O'Connell does 3-year-old emails
Right.
or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And meanwhile, Jaleel wants to know what's up with the sideburns.
Well,
I mean, there's a lot of things you've done wrong, Greg. You have a lot to apologize
I know.
for.
I mean, you know, the secret Davos meetings is just the tip of the iceberg.
And all the Disney, it's hard finding time to even have any family time with all of the Disney meetings and everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Luckily, there's no really big hacks that need to be analyzed in terms of Russia and Israel and who's doing anything.
No. There's nothing to see here going on there. I mean, you know, and we're still. Meanwhile, there's no reason not to create elaborate conspiracies about certain people in media that are actually doing things of value and are not like acting as like apologists for Trump based on some camaraderie with a major global criminal who happens to be of Irish Catholic descent and talks about Henry Kissinger in a weaponized controlled opposition manner.
Davos too. Don't forget Davos.
Yes, the party of Davos. Yes,
and it's how many people. It's just. And all of these conspiracy theories about all of the African Americans dying at 2 to 3 times everybody else. It's just a David Icke hoax going on here in the American COVID genocide.
Yeah.
And anybody who tells you different is just a World Economic Forum shill. Those who want to tell you about vitamin D or actually the way that masks actually can work, DIY masks, or how we could actually end the pandemic here in this country without the vaccines and before the vaccines even arrived. But it takes not buying into David Icke, Alex Jones hoaxes. I'm sorry. I'm just pissed. I'm so pissed off. I'm sorry.
No, it is. It's infuriating, especially, and it's infuriating. At some point, we'll have to go back and do a deep dive, like into the some of the purveyors of the actual the major sources of like the propaganda surrounding COVID. Everything from the elaborate the laying out of the plot to basically the Chi-Com plot to infect America with COVID to
by the Israeli biological weapons colonel Danny Shoham, for example.
Yes, and all of the forces in with that whole Washington Times Council for National Policy Committee on the Present Danger China neocon crew, and even how that fits into the same interest pushing like hardcore. Even we could have arguments and debates and discussions about like what the proper response is in terms of a way that would actually bring safety to people, like the best interest of the public, in a manner that doesn't completely. Unfortunately, what we're seeing here with this effect it's having on the long-term effects it is going to have economically, unfortunately, in terms of the way this has been affecting business, where we could actually have had a serious dialogue debate about what the hell actually was going on from the very beginning. And also we can have conversations about this in the nature of like the best way to like get people back out in public and the best way to like start conversations about how the public should begin to like mass interact with each other once again. But the way it was laid out, and I'm focusing here, like I'm not, I know it's a bipartisan effort. Like we've talked about, not only was the Trump administration downplaying, but it was also the people who are now leading the response. The Dr. Fauci's and the World Health Organizations and their arms in media and in other areas of medicine, of activism, that we're downplaying, like, we don't need to wear these masks in public, we don't need to worry about this, and this. And so, there's a lot of deception all over the place that I think's made this problem so much worse. But specifically focusing on what we're pointing at is like the nature of like the propaganda, as far as the origins of this, and the very weaponized way it's been used in terms of creating the culprits responsible for this. And you see also there is a continuum between that and even like the types of like the propaganda of, well, this thing combination of, this isn't so bad, let's just reopen our economy and just get everybody back out and pumping money into the economy, combined with the even the pushes, even people like Scott Atlas going on Russian state television and pushing for the oh, well, let's just get everybody out there, herd mentality, folks. And
Herd
so
immunity, yeah.
herd immunity, yes. And so there's there's debates and discussions to be had about that, but at the same time, like, it is important to understand like where the sources are coming from for the combination of these narratives that like people within like what we know as the alternative media are just absolutely just running wild with, almost uniformity in terms of the whether it's like your typical quote right wingers, or even those who fancy themselves as like kind of seeing through the left right paradigm, and even people who would consider themselves to be quote far left, whatever that means, really coming together on this for a combination of reasons, whether it's like the opposition to mask wearing, or whether they see this whole thing as a plot to bring in like this Davos, as you were talking about before, Davos, World Economic Forum, George Soros, Great Reset, and there are legitimate conversations to be had about all of those things.
Oh yeah.
But I think it has to be done in a manner that just goes outside of simply like, oh, this whole thing's a hoax, and anybody who has concerns about it is just like playing into, you're dumb and you're ignorant and you're playing into the hands of the whatever globalist or neoliberal force you want to say is behind pushing this. And so
yeah, that's part of the operation. Think about like when you're dealing like a mass psychological operation, for example, September 11th. Now, COVID, right? COVID-19, it's obviously, whatever the nature of it, it's being used. It's a mass psychological operation of sorts. So think about September 11th. There was ways that people could have denied that anyone was either hurt on September 11th, or denying the level, the scale of the weaponry involved, for example, at Ground Zero in New York on 9/11, in terms of the dozens of thousands of people, maybe more, who were caught up in the health wake of that, because human beings and building materials were being vaporized, basically turned into microspheres, and all of that was being breathed in by people. And so sure, there was a way to go about it, basically say, oh, no one died in the towers, let's just argue about whether there were planes or not, that kind of stuff. That was an approach that people took for over a decade now, right? And you could say that's a potentially quote unquote legitimate way to go after the quote unquote hoax of the war on terror, i.e. the question of being groped at the airport, the creation of Homeland Security. But then meanwhile, another immediate effect of the narrative of September 11th was the wars, right? And so it was way beyond, I associate, sure, I think the fake escalation of Homeland Security and the blue gloves and the TSA post 9/11, it is a creeping, it's a creeping slope to tyranny. It's an inculcation into prison culture, especially since it's based on a treasonous falsehood. But and this in terms of COVID, the anti-mask approach, for example, combined with the hoax approach, is like basically the so-called 9/11 truthers who focused on it's all victims in the building. No one actually died. There was not actually any. It's mainly a TV illusion, and then it's all about the our discomfort with the blue gloves and the TSA when you're not dealing with the mass murder, the treason, the mass war crimes, the thousands and thousands of human bodies beginning to stack up, the depleted uranium, the 100,000 something, hundreds of thousands of people in largely Muslim lands dead, over 100,000 American veterans dead of suicide, let alone all the dozens of thousands who've their physical lives have been destroyed, their mental lives have been destroyed. Sure, we could make the whole thing about whether there were planes or not, or whether there was actually people dead in the towers, or we can make the whole thing about, oh, when I go to the airport, there's blue gloves, and we go through, I have to do extra security screening and stuff like that. Sure, I don't like it either, but the way I approached it, I would talk. When I go through the airport, I talk. I still refuse the body scanners, and I talk about Israeli intelligence. Be like, oh, it's so interesting about September 11th. You remember like this whole thing about the shoes? You remember that whole thing about the shoes? The reason we do that is some guy didn't have a passport, was brought onto a plane via some kind of intelligence agent, and then ever since then we're all taking off our shoes. You remember September 11th when you didn't hear about the Israeli intelligence operatives, the ones who are actually the only people on September 11th that were arrested under suspicion of actually having some knowledge or being potentially involved, explosives and I'll say explosives at the airport. I'm careful about what I say, but I'll talk while I'm getting my pat down because I'm not going through the body scan. And sure, I can make a whole big old deal about focusing on the planes or not the planes or the victims or the focus on the blue gloves and the body scanners. But meanwhile, there's moral and political priorities going on. Same thing in terms of COVID-19. And to me, I find it very depressing and telling at some level that everybody from the milieu of someone like Brendan O'Connell to the milieu of someone like Whitney Webb, all stuck in this whole weaponized area in relationship to COVID-19. Whitney Webb was one of the first ones onto the trail of the actual potential weapons programs, DARPA, the laboratories, the Israeli involvement potentially in all of this. What'd you say?
Yeah, we had a conversation with Whitney several months back about all of this. It relates back to Dark Winter and the long-term biological warfare propaganda being put out over the course of a few decades, leading to a moment such almost seemingly leading to a moment such as this, even interconnecting this propaganda with the pre and post September 11th propaganda surrounding different avenues of warfare. Of course, one of which was physical in terms of September 11th, but then biological in terms of what we're seeing laying out right this moment. So.
Yep. Yeah, and that was the road that needed to be go down. And then meanwhile, the main platform that featured her and her work, continuing to be very important work, is Last American Vagabond, who's basically threw in his lot with the guy who's named after the comedian Andrew Kaufman, and the whole COVID hoax. The virus hasn't been isolated. He threw his lot in very early with this guy. I'm not saying I totally endorse him. I'm just saying, we have to ask questions. I'm not telling you what to think. I just saying. Meanwhile, he never told anybody about serious statistics. It was always about the CDC statistics are all overblown. Nothing about actual direct personal reports from the numbers of African American people in this country who have multiple members of their family, their extended family dead. Now we're talking about towns in Kansas, in western Kansas, with small amounts of people, but where the entirety percentage of the death rate of the entire town is larger than what these people are telling you about the danger of COVID more generally. It's like there's actually one in a 100 something people in the entire town have died. The Dakotas are already under one in 1,000 of all Dakotans have died of COVID. I'm sure there's people who are going to say they jumped off cliffs and they were tested with a high cycling PCR with COVID and they just blamed it on COVID. This is such crazy stuff when you actually check in with nurses. You go to Twitter and just check in to actually people talking about their personal experience. Fucking and
Jeremy,
Brendan O'Connell, when I had that conversation with him, that he's now smearing as if like I pursued him because I'm some kind of spy for Disney or the Chinese or some other bullshit. Fucking liar ass dude, when he has such important information that he's avoiding by doing that, blaming it on Greg's sideburns from 3 years ago and some comment that was gone years ago while we were dissecting the white nationalist weaponized movement, and we were talking about how to most effectively dissect it, i.e. by talking, debating, facing it, actually facing our debates instead of pushing the bagel boy as Brendan did onto Ryan Dawson, because he wouldn't take his own debates. At that time when I engaged Brendan, because when Brendan is in trouble, I get concerned about him because I care about him. I do. That's the open history here is when when I believe that Brendan gets in trouble. For example, the reason that I first engaged Ryan Dawson for the debate was not because I thought it was worthwhile to engage Ryan Dawson in a debate about Talpiot and all that kind of stuff. I didn't actually. Who has Jeremy? Whoever's Jeremy, this Ewok. Fuck you, Ryan. I'll debate you anytime. Let's do it again, fuckface.
Is Ryan still proclaiming the Netanyahu faction as the lesser evil because it's not directly Epstein, unlike the Ehud Barak faction?
Yeah, Ryan said that, dude. Ryan is going with the Netanyahu faction over the Ehud Barak faction. That's some crazy shit.
I haven't checked in on Dawson in about a month, but that's what he was pushing just after the election. That and a combination of stolen election. The real neocons are going to be the Bidens.
What a stupid ass.
Because Russia's great and wonderful, and the Zionists fucking hate Putin's guts because he's standing up to them and he's stopping the globo homo. I mean,
I'm just hanging out with David Duke for the shekels, David Duke for the shekels, Ryan Dawson.
Back in 2016, I was accurately calling out as a boogeyman the media presents every few years to scare people and discredit you.
Yeah, so the way that Ryan Dawson will hang out with David Duke for the shekels is a similar way that Brendan O'Connell will make up falsehoods and slander over and over and over again after being fact-checked over and over again about something as silly as like what's really Greg's sideburns when it comes down to it. And that's for the shekels too, it looks like to me. But my point was that when I first engaged Dawson for debate, it was because Brendan was in jail in New Zealand and Dawson was calling him crazy. Okay. Yeah. And I've always been worried, dude, I don't think that's right to do that. I've done my own analysis of Brendan. I think he's not psychopathic. He's not quote unquote crazy. He is a malignant narcissist though. And that truly gets in the way of his important work because everything hovers around him. And that's why it's so difficult to actually create political, working, professional alliances over the long term because it can't be all about you. Okay. So, but my final point was that when I reached out to Brendan when he'd gone to Lebanon, it was because his buddy Sufyan told me that it was happening and that I needed to get on the ball and to put some focus on Brendan. And so I did that. So then I reached out. And during that interview that I took down after he kept slandering us over and over and over again, factlessly, he played down COVID. I was telling him, this is March. I was like, this is real. This is going to be substantial. There's something serious here. And to this day, he's still dismissing it. So I'm just saying that from Whitney Webb and the Last American Vagabond whole milieu, and I don't believe Whitney Webb has not actually herself really made any sort of public, deep proclamations about the truth of COVID. But that milieu, the entirety of that milieu is largely based in COVID disinformation. And I would say it's dangerous disinformation because it led to this situation. That kind of information helped lead to this situation. Of course, the entirety of the power spectrum is playing this in their own way. There's a lockdown that didn't need to happen. I propose a very basic 3-part simple approach that could end the pandemic. It's an escalating pandemic in the United States in terms of COVID. If we had rapid antigen testing, that means at home, where everyone could just sort of test themselves for specifically looking. So, and this is the whole thing too, is like there's very little facts in the so-called alternative media about things that matter about people's health, for example, such as testing and COVID. It's almost no one did the reading. Polymerase chain reaction testing is a problem if you it's basically based on how many cycles you do in relationship. It's how sensitive you are in looking for a viral fragment, basically. So in terms of forensics, like the law, you would think about how small are we going to look for a hair or DNA of someone who we think is a murderer, while you're saying, oh, is the murder still in the room? Sure, you sort of like scrape the whole room, you'll find a hair that has the DNA, you know, and that doesn't prove that the murderer is in the room. And so that's sort of been the problem with the polymerase chain reaction stuff. They've been spinning it. And so basically it's just saying there's been an encounter, very likely, of this person with this viral, body at some point, but it could have been way back. It could be evidence that someone actually might have antibodies. So it actually could be evidence that they probably are very likely to not spread it. Maybe they wouldn't even need to wear a mask in order to protect others, that kind of thing. The rapid antigen testing is basically like a home pregnancy test, very cheap, very highly accurate in terms of if you have a double test, it's up above 99%, but it would work. And you sort of like you test yourself twice a week. Then you know that if you're going out, it's very, very likely that you don't have it. Or then that's the main thing for actually moral, caring, thinking human beings is to not just think about themselves, but to think about others. And sure that, for people, most people our age, very few people are going to die in a serious encounter with COVID. At the same time, it seems like there's a lot more, people our age who are having serious deals with COVID, way more than you sort of know about what people having with the flu, for example. It's way more dangerous than the flu. The way it attacks the entirety of the system, the way it's like basically a blood disease, airborne blood disease of some sort. What'd you say?
That's not what Cancer Man told me on the radio, Rush Limbaugh.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So the entire alternative media is in bed with like Rush Limbaugh, epistemologically.
The cold flu.
Wait. Say again. Do it again. What did he say?
The cold flu, ladies and gentlemen. This is the cold flu.
He said that the cold flu.
He's referred to it as that for, and I find it so fascinating. The guy who is dying from cancer and expects people to, he really lays it on thick with his audience about, I love you guys and I'm not going to be with you forever and I'm thankful every day, but also like downplaying something that's killing other people. It's amazing to me. I mean, it's not amazing when you consider just like bankrupt.
Yeah, he played it pretty loose with American soldiers' lives and Iraqi lives, so it's not stunning. The moral level there is not it's not quite a high bar.
No, but still, it's and I mean there was a downplaying, but also we got to go back to this, like what you're laying out here. I mean, all across the board, everything about this was completely bungled, and I mean it almost seemed like it's by design just how bad things have been bungled, and now we are facing still could have gotten very bad. Regardless of like what kind of precautions were actually taken, that could have actually helped people and actually helped the country. But I mean, with the combination of now what you're seeing, you do have I would say borderline a catastrophe on our hands, with the combination of the havoc that's being wreaked on businesses in this country, particularly the smaller businesses that did not have the economic wherewithal sustained economic shutdown, and that we saw were screwed over with what was supposed to be the small business loans going to the businesses, and instead basically were given out to all kinds of entities that were very financially already sustainable that didn't really need them. So you have that going on, and the short-term and long-term effects they'll have on our economy. I mean, that is where like there is a legitimate concern about there even be something so-called like that would be where a lot of the concerns about even things such as that we hear about like the new normal and the Great Reset, where the effect that it actually has on businesses in this country, particularly smaller businesses, I think there's definitely a lot of legitimacy there, and it's
Oh
also
yeah.
being once again, this is something else that's being weaponized by like, the Tucker Carlsons of the world, whereas these business owners who are legitimately angry and frustrated with this continued shutdowns affecting their livelihood to the point where they're getting punished for trying to operate their businesses in this continued shutdown after they were not given the help that they needed, that they were supposed to get. And then, but now the anger about that is shifted in turn to, well, it's the Democrats' fault because they're just a bunch of hypocrites who are trying to shut you down. Well, and so it's weaponized all over the place. So you
All
have this
over the
situation
whole
where,
thing. It's
yeah,
just like
you have this
9/11. It's like 9/11. It's like there's no Democrats who are going to tell you the truth about 9/11. Just like there were no Republicans who were going to tell you the truth about 9/11. The entire thing was going to be weaponized for escalating treason and war crimes. Same thing with COVID. And this is a much more pervasive and global and big time thing. And this is why it's such a moral failure, not just like a political and epistemological failure, but a moral failure for the entirety, basically, of the alternative media to have put their lot in fake crap. That because the thing about it was, especially if you think about like in the wake of the kind of stuff that we've very carefully analyzed in the Trump years, that the alternative media is really crucial in relationship to the Trump sphere. There could have been serious pressure if they had actually had their minds together and been careful about what they were actually proposing. We could have made the conversation about, oh, we can shut down this pandemic now and we can keep all the small businesses open in a proper way if we were just talking rationally about what we could do. Basic things, that's what I'm saying, like rapid antigen testing, that could be done right now with the Defense Production Act. And instead of just sort of just the entirety of the sort of left and the right weaponized and the Trump people basically just only angry with Trump for enabling the lockdowns without actually addressing the biological threat to the people. And sure, oh, you want to write off grandma, or you want to write off, the people in the old folks' homes, or you want to write off the sort of, it's not going to happen to you. All right, fine. I guess that's up to you. But meanwhile, if you don't actually deal with quote unquote public health in a rational fashion, with proposals and political pressure, then you end up in this kind of escalating crap, dude. And there were possibilities here. For example, the rapid antigen testing, you add the vitamin D focus, right? For all of the sort of focus on the Democrat establishment. And of course, it's not just them. Trump's escalating on the sort of the vaccine as the savior and all
although
of that.
Trump is now trying to play good cop by refusing to take the vaccine publicly until his doctor's okay it, unlike a bad cop. Trump's despite
Unlike bad cop
wanting to
who?
take all
Wait,
the credit for the vaccine. Unlike I guess like you could say Trump's being the good cop, like, oh, I'm not going to take the vaccine until my doctors tell me to. Unlike Pence, who's all willing to get out there with the demon rat presidents and the neocon Bush and take the vaccine. Trump, despite like wanting to take credit for Operation Warp Speed and getting the vaccine out there in record time. And boy, there's a ton of backstory regarding like some of the events leading up to the vaccinations that would be interesting to maybe delve into another time. But Trump still wants to have it both ways, where he still wants to be the hero who's somehow still standing out against the vaccination crowd, even though like he's entirely made this vaccine push possible. So,
oh yeah, and you go look and like what Ivanka Trump openly stated on Twitter was that Donald Trump made a deal. It looks like they made some kind of deal with Moderna, Mode RNA, early on, like January, I think, or February, like really early, really some nasty stuff. You remember like the two people running for Senate for the Republicans in Georgia, Loeffler and Perdue, the criminal inside traders who traded on their inside information about, oh yeah, how this is dangerous. They're going to make money on body bags. Sick. All of this going on, and vitamin D, my point about the vaccines and the pushing of it by the sort of the Democrats along with Trump to some extent. Like you said, he's acting like the good pusher in some way. The lack of talk about vitamin D, and then the lack of focus on vitamin D by the alternative media, and all the political points were there. You go, I have all these reports, vitamin D, tons of reports, lots of scientific studies in lots of different fashions, lots of different countries. Vitamin D looks to be 90% of worst case outcomes in COVID are due to vitamin D deficiency. All right. There you go. If you just make that point, you basically say the vitamin D is as or more effective than what they're saying these vaccines are. Discounting the side effects. Sure, you can take too much vitamin D, but if you eat it, if you make sure you're having vitamin D rich foods, you're in great shape. Vitamin D is crucial to everything. Actually, I've been looking into it. To me, it looks like vitamin D may be the crucial element in all, or at least most global pandemic over the years. I found an interesting paper from over 15 years ago, I think it was, that showed that in the years leading up to all these great pandemics, including the Black Death in the Middle Ages, there is a darkening of the sun due to some kind of volcanic eruption or something like that, i.e., then human beings not able to make as much endogenous vitamin D. And, vitamin D in relationship to respiratory illnesses. There's tons of studies on all of that. It's crucial. It actually is an endogenous. It's a hormone really. And so it's crucial to so many functions. Okay, so that's number two. In the UK, they're giving 2.5 million doses, or they're giving vitamin D to 2.5 million British people who are most vulnerable over this winter. I haven't even heard any single public official talk about vitamin D, bring it even up, and I believe that is a large portion of the explanation for why COVID has hit communities of color, and most obviously Black communities, the hardest. Those studies are very obvious too. That people who have genetics that come from more around the equator are in much more sun, that it takes a lot more sun to create endogenous vitamin D. Those studies are there too. Go look at there's a Somali population, I think, in Northern Europe somewhere, maybe in one of the Nordic countries. They got hit with 90% or something like that, like way over clocking, like 100x over in terms of the COVID deaths in that region. All right. So we're going to just hammer the vitamin D. It make everyone healthier anyways. And meanwhile, it's Andrew Kaufman and CDC overblown statistics, and people are jumping off cliffs and being claimed to have had a PCR test with COVID, And then finally, a rational talk about masks. Sure. Yeah, you don't want to be forced to wear a mask when you're walking around the block with your family or in a sort of outdoor space. But it makes a lot of sense to wear the most effective masks that you can, both for yourself and for others, in terms of containing and all the emphasis. People like Tony Hall and stuff like that who just ended up in these like Andrew Kaufman, John Rappaport sinkholes, and Tony Hall's going to make his stand and writing a letter to Costco about masks, and Helen Biniski is going to make a big stand about complaining about the tyranny starts by her having to wear a mask in someone else's Uber car, in some immigrant guy's Uber car, because he doesn't know whether she's spreading it or not. That's what we're dealing with, and I just find the whole thing shameful overall. And
I don't know if Scott Creighton, Willie Loman 1 on Twitter, ChurchDog42 on YouTube is going to ever listen to this or not. I know I've been blocked on Twitter with them due to interaction I had with somebody who's relatively close to me. I don't know if I want to get into the details of that now. It involves a lot of things regarding multipolarity and who our friends and allies on a global geopolitical scale are and are not. But I mean, it's interesting how where a Scott Creighton can accurately call out like the propaganda being directed towards the African American population in terms of the vaccine. And some of the I would say there's been some pretty nasty propaganda from like people like Anthony Fauci, as far as like, come on, Black America, you got to take the vaccine first. That whole, I'd say there's some pretty nasty propaganda in that regard. But then also, where does somebody like a Scott Creighton stand on like the actual effects that this virus, this pandemic is having on the Black population?
No, he's in full denial of it.
So
he's lying his ass off. Oh, he's not lying, because I don't think he knows, but he's deceiving. He's deceiving the people about these crucial things. It's the same thing with like Whitney Webb wrote a really important article with a former producer from an RT program about this exact topic that you're talking about the targeting of communities of color and of communities in danger, allegedly, and the question of Palantir technology and the whole background of that whole surveillance technology in total information awareness, and really important stuff. And then meanwhile, it from the very get-go, it totally pushes aside the question that it's a the whole thing is plausible, just like the 9/11 and the war on terror, that Afghanistan is plausible if you're not in denial that Ground Zero was vaporized with lots of human beings with missing bones and stuff like that. Once you sidestep that from the beginning and you say, oh, this whole thing is just based on some kind of illusionary fraud, you basically, it really undermines the key pieces of the critique of the so-called response. All right. And so that needs to be dealt with. This is a real impact on certain communities in the United States. And like I'm pointing out, it's not just communities of color anymore that are being hit intensely. It's also Trump communities. It's also white rural Trump communities who, to their very last breath, basically believed it was a hoax because Cancer Man or Alex Jones or whatever their crazy Christian Zionist, so-called Christian Zionist leadership in the church told them that it's not real. And then they're dead from the airborne blood disease, basically, that makes it very difficult for especially for elders. Like that's also a thing with vitamin D. Maybe they don't get outside as much. It takes more time if you're an elder to get up to proper endogenous vitamin D levels just from sun, and so places like the Dakotas, like I said, but Tennessee or this small town in western Kansas, or Arizona, they're also now suffering. So it's not just communities of color that are being hit extra hard. It's also hardcore Trump communities. So there is an overall COVID genocide attack on the United States of America that includes the biology, the real biological effect on actual human beings and the economy, because as long as the virus is going out of control, it's very difficult to come to a rational policy approach to figure out how to open the economy up, even though it's very possible. The three things that I lay out: rapid antigen testing at home for everybody who's willing to do it totally voluntary, just so your knowledge, if and when you go out that week, whether you are putting other people in danger. You can basically guarantee that you're not, and then that's a great way to do it. Vitamin D for all. Make sure that this is a basic public health thing. It's also a personal thing. The entire alternative media could have focused on this rather than the Andrew Kaufman and the David Icke pandemic crap, dude. And then finally, a rational approach to masks. And like I've talked about, there's lots of different ways to approach it. You want to talk about N95s. You want to talk about when and where it makes sense. You want to talk about in heavily HVAC indoor situations where people are coming and going a lot or in close contact. It's not the same in outdoor public places. And meanwhile, it was just endless things about, oh, what about the Black Lives Matter protests and that's going to spread it, but our sort of like, free the economy protests are all of that kind of crap, dude. When it was really about like, it's about indoor versus outdoors, the main thing, and all these other factors. And so I just am just so dismayed, and of course, like, I didn't do enough. I've never done enough in terms of what all we're facing here, you know. But
Well, none of us
I've
can.
been honest, and I've been careful, and I propose like stuff with DIY approaches, moral approaches, a combination of trying to identify what's actually going on, combined with not allowing the sort of tyrannical, quote unquote, response to happen. And I'm just sort of sick of it all. And there's a small groups of people in the alternative media that have really taken this on in a rational way. John Brisson, for example, he really early on dealt with a lot of this stuff. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Like, he's a combination of
And
a real
John
deep
is a
deep Christian, and has, he knows about the gut. He's had a real deep personal relationship with medical tyranny, with also medical sovereignty in relationship to one's own family and all of that. And so he was perfectly situated to understand this, I think, in a serious way.
and John is an outlier, and I hate to say this. I mean, unfortunately, like in terms of like the more conservative based worldview, certainly in line with his faith as far as his worldview and his philosophy on life, and of somebody within that milieu of thinking that really, really, I think has been actually really trying to take this thing seriously, as opposed to just like all like the just kind of going along with the crowd and just proclaiming this to be a hoax and all of this and that. And so like for I think for if you're looking for like a rational conversation, I think perhaps the most rational conversation you'll find on the topics related to both like actually taking this damn thing seriously in terms of what it actually appears to be doing to our society. Also with the combination of some of the concerns people will have over things like the way an incoming Biden Harris administration will react through some of the more worrisome, alarmist aspects of like what the new normal is going to be under a Biden Harris administration, with the mass attempts to put this vaccine out to the public en masse, combined with the economic consequences, wherever the truth is about like the actual economic consequences, like the whole not World Health Organization, World Economic Forum crowd towards as far as what's actually not is and is not being planned. I would recommend a conversation that John Brisson had with Neil Sanders, another great researcher out of the UK. Neil Sanders, mindcontrol.com, and he's, I would say, perhaps the leading, in terms of our milieu of thinking, the leading person who's really connected the dots between like the Cambridge Analytica mind control operation in the UK and the right wing here domestically in the US, and their conversation regarding the what is known as the Great Reset, and some of the propaganda outlets and networks that are promoting that. I mean, Neil Sanders brings up some of the names of the people that are really pushing this Great Reset hysteria, but then John comes in with a much more. So I would say perhaps looking for like a serious conversation about both aspects of this. It doesn't just go in like a flying around with your heads chopped off like a chicken. Oh, it's just a hoax. Don't take anything seriously. Everything's just a hoax. There's nobody dying. Blah blah blah. I would recommend somebody like a John Brisson and his channel, and some of the interviews he does and some of the streams he does, as being perhaps the most I would say maybe rational take out there on this from within a more conservative Christian faith based mindset perspective.
Yep.
So
Yeah. All
anyhow,
right.
man, you're on
Sorry.
fire tonight, Jeremy. You're on fire tonight. No, I
Pissed
mean you're on
off,
fire, and
dude.
you've got a lot of fire in your belly, and I like this, and I think this is a good this is a good recipe. You got a lot of fire in your belly, and we're really, I'd say maybe a little more forthright and passionate about some of the things we're discussing here tonight. But I understand, you've been thinking about this. You had a lot to get off your chest regarding the Brendan O'Connells of the world, Mister. Well, I'm going to implicate. Oh, Adam Green secretly going out, hanging out at a monastery with Steve Bannon, whereas Adam Green has been very, very vocal in like condemning everything that Bannon and people like him represent and stand for. Whereas you are openly like touting and shilling for him, and like just how much of like a truth teller he is on terms of like the exposing, like the exposing Israel by bringing down the CCP or something like that, right? And
Yeah.
he said he criticized Henry Kissinger, and he criticized the World Economic Forum. So in his world, it's okay to accuse other people of like secretly hanging out with Steve Bannon at his gladiator monastery, when he's actually the one who's like promoting Steve
Well, but
Bannon
the,
as
the
like this.
the main thing is about not telling lies. Like, if he had,
Exactly.
like, and And that was the point I was always making was like, make your rational criticisms of whoever it is, political criticisms and serious criticisms of us, of Adam, of others. Do it in a fact-based way that's not all about how it's all surrounding you, and everything is out to get you, and it's bullshit. It's not true. You don't accuse people of being agents and insinuating all of this based on deceptions. That whole stuff is just deceptions all the way down. And so, I like we did when we responded to this in our long form video, I can only speak to my own personal knowledge of this. I know he's lying about me, right? So then it makes sense. He's lying about other people, and it also then goes into the realm of shaky analysis around American politics. He's still basically doing a true news sort of soft Trump apology thing. So like he never ever really listened to the AnteDote where we actually deconstructed Trump Russia, continued to,
Right. It drives me crazy because like there's so many ways we've talked about this before among ourselves, like where this man is like he could be a very strong voice as far as like some important topics. Like, I mean, Brendan really like has been one of the people like who's really, I would say, he had his finger on. He was very much bringing up some very important issues regarding some of the nature of like what the Iranian regime might actually be up to in terms of
and he still is, and yet he's smearing it with his malignant narcissist deceptions.
And even like things he was bringing in, like regarding important aspects about like the Israel-Russia relationship and what's really seems to be going on there, and how you could still do that and then be in this combination of like this paranoid narcissism where everything's about you and you're out there pushing false lies about people and slander, combined with still apologizing for Donald Trump at this point in time.
It's wild, So the focus on the issues, right? That's what we want to do. That's the most important thing to do. And that includes like political strategy. That includes like, what are we going to, we need to have big political strategy at this point in time. And there's openings all around. I can tell, from across the entire political spectrum. Everybody knows like from the whole Jimmy Dore, AOC blow up, the left is totally imploding. That's great. Actually, I think, that's the sort of the last refuge of like people who understand economic power dynamics to some extent, imperial warfare dynamics. Hopefully that politics is collapsing. Hopefully the whole like Trump side politics is collapsing in relationship to the Republicans. Sure, there's a possibility that could be rebuilt in a really nasty fashion too, but the radical middle, there's an avenue right up the radical middle. And I'm sorry, to Sufjan, Brendan's friend who reached out to me, he has really good ideas that he's working on. He wants to start a journal specifically about industrial Zionism and like really a sober approach, get the academics, meet the, Middle Eastern sphere to the American sphere. At the same time, that's not my work to do. I'm willing to support that, but that's not my work to do. And it's also like, I was open to talking about it, but then he started basically doing the same kind of stuff that Brendan did. I started noticing the same kind of avoidance of any rational personal accountability around things that he had done in terms of bringing me into a thread with Brendan when I was asking to have a conversation with him. It's obvious he just shares my emails that he said he was going to have with me. We were going to talk. And don't worry, Brendan's not involved in this. Brendan just wants to be, support from the background. And everybody wants their own permaculture farm. So do I, okay? We all have our permaculture farm visions for the future. Meanwhile, we all have our work that we need to do. And we can't do other people's work for them. We can support each other. But meanwhile, I have my work that I also need to do. Okay. Brendan's always talking about no one's ever asked me a single question or supported my case or I've read his documents. I posted links to his documents in the AnteDote before. he never even mentioned that I have an ongoing First Amendment case in the United States of America, and a core topic, not about sort of slapping at a camera of some guy, but taking on the former diplomat to Israel and about 9/11 in Israel in a clear public forum. And so he's never, but I don't expect him to do my work for me. I do my work for me. It's not my, it's not your responsibility, Brendan, to worry about all my stuff. It would have been nice if you'd actually talked about it in a public and rational fashion rather than ignored it and then tried to smear me after I just try to show up for you at certain moments, in difficult moments in you, and try to smear me as some kind of agent. Fuck you. Do your work. Sorry.
Bringing up serious work. You're actually bringing up serious things like your like what happened at the Kansas City Library in the First Amendment case that has followed. That's not as, I guess that's not as fun as going out and concocting conspiracy theories about Jungian political analysts. And by the way, by doing that,
he doesn't even get the basic facts. He just his parents are Jungian analysts. I always told him my mom's a Jungian analyst. My dad's a psychiatrist.
You have a relative in Hollywood or something.
No,
by the way,
no, top level Disney executives in my family.
By the way, I love how
right now, and they're working with Bob Iger in China, and that's where I'm getting my orders from. Get the fuck out of here, dude.
By the way, I love that he's Mr. Don't entertain the anti-Semites. Like, he came after me because I was courting the alt-right, right? I was trying to get him to. But meanwhile, what's he doing by pushing theories about you and Disney executives and the media and Hollywood and Jungian political analysts and whatever, like type of whatever Frankfurt School type of stuff that ultimately would result out of that? He's getting people to believe like you're very, very stereotypical aspects about like your fact that you're Jewish and you're supposedly involved in all these things. So it's like, I guess it's okay for him to do that because it's okay for him to do anything. He can say or do whatever he wants. So it doesn't matter.
All right. Well, okay. All right, let's move on. Meanwhile,
all right. So we discussed,
while Brendan was making tons of hay over Greg's sideburns and my mom as a Jungian analyst and all of that, and my alleged high-level Disney executive family that I'm taking orders from right now on behalf of Bob Iger around some kind of China thing. Meanwhile, while he was doing that, I was producing radio about the SolarWinds hack. Introducing, I believe it's the first time on American terrestrial radio that like the real deep questions about the Pentagon cloud or the Talpiot program was brought into it in a way that could be begun to be talked about. Okay, and I understand that it's not as splashy and flashy as storming Homeland Security with homemade flyers or something like that. But meanwhile, make a C-SPAN phone call like Greg and I have, Brendan. We don't have to. We shouldn't have to do your work on your issue that you own on your behalf. That would be the biggest way to get out of your mom's basement. Would be to actually talk to the American people who listen to C-SPAN. A lot of people listen to C-SPAN in the morning. A lot of policymakers listen to C-SPAN. While you were doing that, meanwhile, I was actually asking the trade representative for Trump, the one who did all the China deals, about Israel, China, and technology transfer, because I fought my battles carefully online, used the new public fora on Zoom and YouTube and stuff like that to put people on the record. I didn't spend all my time bitching about falsehoods. So whatever, dude. Sorry.
You just mentioned SolarWinds, which we're going to get into next, and I guess we could go from what we talked about earlier with the biological warfare to now something I think else that's very, very real in this post September 11th world for like the next generation of warfare being carried out beyond the physical of September 11th and of the wars that followed, and into another aspect of this, which is cyber warfare. So let's get into it.
Cyber warfare. Okay, Greg, can I play some of this radio show, or do you want to just to get into it?
No, let's do it. This is a clip from you from yesterday morning on KKFI Community Radio here in the Kansas City area, 90.1 FM in Kansas City on the program Understanding Israel-Palestine. So we're going to play this, and Jeremy, you want to just briefly or go over what you're going to discuss in this clip that we're going to play.
Yeah, I'm going to play the intro to it, I think, because it introduces that what I'm working on as a conceptual basis moving forward in terms of making this kind of radio. And then I'll fast forward to the actual piece. And it includes, the clips that we're all aware of Netanyahu talking about Israel's driving the world and all that, because a lot is happening here. Other stuff, including this report that just came out from the Citizens Lab up in Toronto, which is the one that first exposed Israeli military intelligence NSO Pegasus software, the one that was used to target everyone from Jamal Khashoggi to apparently to Jeff Bezos, Amazon, in the run-up to the Pentagon cloud push to Microsoft. And Microsoft, what I'm looking at, it looks like Microsoft is at the epicenter even potentially of the SolarWinds scenario too. So it deals with a lot of that. And so I'll just play it from the beginning, and then I think I'll fast forward through the news items.
All right,
let's do it. And maybe we'll post the whole thing on our channel eventually.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear that, Greg? I cannot hear it. Oh yeah, I think there's an issue here. Sorry. Hold on one second here. Oh, I know what I got to do. Sorry. Oh yeah, here we go. 1 second. Oh, I have to share my screen. That's what I got to do. All right, here we go. All right, tell me if you can hear it now, Greg. Greetings and welcome to Understanding Israel-Palestine, Beyond the Walls, on 90.1 FM, KKFI, Kansas City Community Radio. I am this week's producer, Jeremy Roth Kushel, with additional contributions from my co-hosts, Margot Patterson and Jamie Jackson. For this week's show, I will introduce a new format with which to analytically explore, through a multiplicity of sources and diversity of media, 3 areas of inquiry moving forward. 1, the technology of occupation, surveillance, targeting, and cyber weaponry. 2, the politics of repression, infiltration, insecurity, and the policing of speech, press, free inquiry, and moral conscience. And 3, the geostrategy of tension, destabilization, war, and terror. All this with the intent and hope that the pathways for solutions to these dire challenges to human rights for all and our common commitment to the deep traditions of democracy and rule of law can be located and pursued by furthering our understanding. Israel-Palestine, Beyond the Walls. But first, the headline news.
In another U.S. brokered deal, Morocco and Israel have agreed to establish diplomatic relations.
I'm gonna skip forward
Morocco
now.
is the
Okay.
There's some interesting news stories, but people can listen to them when we upload it. The monastery was stormed by hundreds of radical Jewish settlers from
the Northern West Peace Initiative.
Stein, Beyond the Walls. The opinions and analysis expressed in the subsequent segment of the show represent mine alone and do not necessarily represent those of my fellow co-hosts, nor those of the station or anyone associated with the station. Additionally, any clips from other media sources are truncated appropriately with the fair use doctrine in mind in order to contextualize, analyze, and comment upon matters in and of the public interest. In this week's segment, I want to preliminarily explore the realm of cyber technology and cyber weapons that have been, quote, battle-tested on Palestinian people in the occupied territories and then deployed worldwide. This will work also to begin establishing a foundation for further future explorations into cyber breaches, cyber war, and what could be seen as a geopolitical and de facto Israeli policy. A policy to solidify Israel's realpolitically absolute international immunity from the effective sanctioning of its asserted official territorial expansion in the West Bank and Golan Heights, and its long-term ongoing abuse of Palestinian human rights. This geopolitical strategy could be titled kill switch diplomacy, based upon the presence of Israeli military intelligence-originated hardware and software delivered via both civilian and military spheres and deployed into the epicenter of critical infrastructure in countries around the world, with civil society carrots of access to Israeli high technology up front and an implied threat of Israeli military intelligence accessed infrastructure kill switch sticks on the back end. The recently announced hack of SolarWinds Orion network management software that was cyber penetrated in early 2020 via supply-side software update delivery into thousands of information technology systems around the world, including significant portions of the United States government, such as the Pentagon, Secret Service, State Department, Treasury, Commerce, and Homeland Security, and vast numbers of Fortune 500 companies, is both resonant and possibly relevant here. While we will not delve deeply into it now, I just want to mention that there is industry analysis alleging a Microsoft 365 Office Cloud tie-in to the delivery of the SolarWinds Orion exploit, plausibly tying it to the issue of last year's surprising Trump-pushed Pentagon Cloud Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure, JEDI, contract to Microsoft over the expected recipient and previous cloud partner of the U.S. government, Amazon, led by Trump critic Jeff Bezos, who was also personally targeted and hacked by Saudis apparently using Israeli NSO group cyber weaponry. Microsoft, which has had research and design units, facilities, and operations heavily based in Israel for many years, in 2015 purchased an Israeli-originated company, AnteDote, started by 3 veterans of the Israeli NSA, Unit 8200, and cyber entrepreneurial special forces style super elite Talpiot program with Series A investment funding from the quote-unquote Bill Gates of Israel and godfather of its modern cyber technology industry, Zohar Zisapel of the RAD Group. The next year, and in the lead up to the development of the Pentagon Cloud Project announcement and then contract award, Microsoft put AnteDote in the place of and rebranded it as Microsoft Cloud App Security. And while the SolarWinds hacks, described as possibly the most substantial hack in American history, given the exploiters of the intrusion, quote-unquote God door access, has been publicly and preliminarily ascribed to Russian SVR, Advanced Persistent Threat Cyber Intelligence Units. As this show's earlier interview with New York Times bestselling author and journalist Seth Abramson showed, Russia and Israel worked in cyber purpose together in relation to the 2016 election operations that served to install Donald Trump in the White House. Thus, a potential collaboration or cyber alliance of some sort between Russian and Israeli leadership is not necessarily implausible nor off the table. But in introducing this segment and its focus on Israeli cyber weapons company associates, NSO Group, and circles that have mainly been deployed, as we publicly know, against individuals such as journalists, dissidents, and corruption investigators, there are 2 ideas about this realm of cyber that I want to make explicit, both of them revolving around the fact that this technology is being deployed via a military intelligence network of a garrison warfare state. 1. These are cyber weapons that were, what is called in marketing materials, battle-tested. In the case of this garrison state, Israel, and its cyber weapons, that means that they have been tested in the battle for maintaining a long-term violent occupation, which by many credible accountings is criminal under international law. These cyber weapons are literally, whether used for surveillance or targeting for what the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs calls civil assassination, or for more blunt, physical assassination, such as when Saudi dissident analyst Jamal Khashoggi was targeted for his ultimate dismemberment via the use of the Israeli military intelligence firm NSO Group cyber weapon called Pegasus, technologies of occupation. And 2, even when hardware and software are being deployed by this military intelligence network for apparent civilian, commercial, and/or defensive purposes, it remains technology of cyber war, developed by operatives and officers of the Israeli military and intelligence command structure, and thus the question of a backdoor military application or implication of diplomatic threat remains present. In his March 2018 public address to the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made these audacious yet plausible remarks.
Israel is changing the world in India, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, everywhere. Now there are new industries. Israel is literally, how can I say this?
How can I say this?
Israel is literally driving the world. I'm talking about autonomous vehicles. Israel is a world leader in autonomous vehicles. 500 tech companies that sprang out almost instantaneously.
Especially after
And
September
one of them,
11th.
Mobileye, up there on the left, was just sold to Intel for the paltry sum of $15 billion. But the interesting thing is that Intel said to them, here are the keys to our 30 worldwide autonomous vehicle businesses. You run it. Israeli technology is driving the world. We went to Argentina, to Colombia, to Mexico, and they say, come back, we want more. That is changing. All these countries are coming to us. India, China, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, all of them. Azerbaijan, Muslim countries. And you know what? The numbers, you remember people talked about Israel's isolation? Remember that? Israel's isolation? Pretty soon, the countries that don't have relations with us, they're going to be isolated.
Here, one more segment after this, Greg, and then I'll stop it.
There are those who talk about boycotting Israel. We'll boycott them.
What a nut. But Israeli technology is not just being provided to its ostensible allies or being used to drive Intel's global autonomous vehicle industry or being deployed against its boycotting nemesis, but also being contracted out to customers who, quote, have a history of leveraging digital technology for human rights abuses, unquote. As a recent Citizen Lab report released December 1st, 2020, titled Running in Circles, Uncovering the Clients of Cyber Espionage Firm Circles, discloses. The Citizen Lab is located at the University of Toronto and was the source of the original expose of the NSO Group's Pegasus technology and its role in targeting globally. Before we hear a Palestinian perspective about the origins of this kind of Israeli intelligence technology in targeting Palestinians, a few key points from the report. Quote, Circles is a surveillance firm that reportedly exploits weaknesses in the global mobile phone system to snoop on calls, texts, and the location of phones around the globe. Circles is affiliated with NSO Group, which develops the oft-abused Pegasus spyware, unquote. Further down in the report, quote, according to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, all U.S. wireless networks are vulnerable to the types of weaknesses reportedly exploited by Circles. A majority of networks around the globe are similarly vulnerable. Using internet scanning, we found a unique signature associated with the host names of checkpoint firewalls used in Circle's deployments. This scanning enabled us to identify Circle's deployments in at least 25 countries, unquote. In distinction to the Pegasus software's phone-based targeting that leaves the digital trace, the checkpoint firewall technology utilized by Circles allows for a very difficult to trace network attack on things like two-factor authentication, text messages of the target themselves. Among the countries listed as having governments that were Circle's customers, the report lists Australia, Belgium, Chile, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Indonesia, Israel, Kenya, Malaysia, Mexico, Morocco, Serbia, Thailand, the UAE, Vietnam, and Zimbabwe, among others. This is Marwa Fatafta from Access Now and a policy analyst at Al Shabaka from a April 2020 Al Jazeera documentary titled Pandemic Panopticon.
Palestinians have been exposed to invasive surveillance for decades by the Israeli authorities. Our ICT infrastructure is controlled by Israel, and therefore it has direct access to Palestinians' data. They are collecting information on people's health situation, if someone is having an affair, on sexual orientation, on their financial needs, and in some cases this information has been used to blackmail Palestinians. The surveillance is so invasive that it has become in our DNA as Palestinians that we know that Israel, is this omnipresent power, that it knows everything about us.
I think back to what journalist Richard Silverstein told me in our very first Understanding Israel-Palestine show. Okay, Greg, there's like another, 6 minutes or something like that. Should I stop it for now and we go talk again, or should I play a little more?
I want to play. Let's play what Richard Silverstein had to say, and then we can make a judgment call from there on how much more to play.
Okay, sounds good. From September of 2019, paper that you presented at an Islamophobia conference earlier this year of 2019 at Berkeley Law School, titled Israel and the Selling of the Surveillance State. And you pointed out the connection between some of the technology, such as the Pegasus software being brokered around the world by this Israeli corporate technology to track down journalists and dissenters, but also how it's been used on the Palestinians in the long-term occupation.
Right. There is we hear about the startup nation, the vaunted startup nation, part of the brand Israel promotion around the world. Well, part of the startup nation is actually quite malevolent, and that includes a company called NSO Group. NSO Group is in this market niche where they basically hack cell phones around the world for not for individuals, but for nation states and for police states and for intelligence agencies. That the NSO claims that the purpose of its technology is to combat terrorism and combat gangs and drug dealers, and perhaps some of their work is done legitimately in that area. But actually much more common is that authoritarian states like the Gulf states that we've been talking about, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, are using this technology to attack legitimate political actors and dissidents inside their own countries, human rights activists, journalists, teachers, lawyers who are human rights lawyers. And this happened most famously or infamously in Mexico, where you had the parents of the disappeared that were trying to create awareness of their plight, of their children who were murdered by officials of the state, police. And so there are human rights activists and journalists that are trying to help these parents and these NGOs in Mexico. And the software, the malware, I would call it, that NSO produces was used to hack the phones and surveil these people, find out what they were doing. And in the case of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who your listeners may remember was murdered in the Saudi embassy in Istanbul, one of the ways in which they tracked Khashoggi's whereabouts so that they could determine that he was coming to the embassy where they could prepare to kill him was through hacking the cell phone of a close associate of Khashoggi who he was in constant contact with. So this is an especially pernicious and malevolent form of Israeli software that is being exported around the globe. And you have other companies like we mentioned, Psy Group, and it's been hired to track here in America, to track the individual who was the host of the conference that I delivered that paper at, Professor Hatem Bazian, professor and founder of a Islamic university in Berkeley. And Psy Group was commissioned to track him and to post flyers on the vehicles of all of his neighbors that identified him supposedly as a terrorist. And so this is coming home to roost. You remember that saying from the 60s of the chickens are coming home to roost. Well, Israel is really bringing this surveillance technology, this intrusive invasion of privacy of activists working on issues like BDS and really working to promote Palestinian rights here in the U.S. They are being commissioned by American Jews, pro-Israel American Jews, to track us and to monitor what we do and to try to interfere. I would remind your listeners that an Israeli minister spoke at a conference in Israel, and he said that he intended to engage in the civil targeted assassination of BDS leaders and activists. And so I take this very seriously. The use of the term targeted assassination, we all know what that means. And they're claiming that it's a civil targeted assassination. In other words, that they want to destroy the reputations of BDS and the people, the activists involved in it. But Israel doesn't really know where the boundary is between a civil targeted assassination and an actual targeted assassination. So I worry that we could easily bleed over into something far more dangerous and serious unless U.S. authorities take much more stringent action to prevent this sort of activity on our soil.
All right.
Okay, so that was from KKFI Community Radio, Kansas City, Understanding Israel Palestine, a weekly program that airs on Friday mornings. And this was, I would say, some of the most, as you mentioned in leading up to this clip, I mean, some of the perhaps the most serious analysis and breakdowns of this dynamic that we've just laid out here as it relates to this current event with this mass cyber hacking, perhaps the biggest hacking in American history, as it's been called. And in this, I don't think it's ever been laid. I certainly haven't heard it laid out in this context on commercial radio the way you have. And so, man, it brings us to this event right now. This SolarWinds hacking in there's a big blame game going on between the people who want to blame China, the people who want to blame Russia, and then the usual suspects. We go back to the alternative media, and then the figures like in the Aaron Mateys and the gray zone projects of the world who just want to simply poo-poo anything related to this because it's more fear-mongering and hysteria against Russia. And anytime you dare to disparage even slightly, or not even so much disparage, just try to even have this serious correspondence about the nature of what Mother Russia's doing in the world, and you're a Russophobe who wants to start a new Cold War and perhaps a physical war with Russia. So,
yeah, I mean this.
But anyway, thank you for doing that. In this capacity on this, bringing this to light in the manner that you did, and so thank you for that. And I would like to post this complete segment on our channel here in the not so distant future. So
Okay, I'll give you like the segment all on its own, so it doesn't have like all of the other station accoutrements and everything and all of that to it, and then we can post it on there. Yeah, I mean, I struggled with it a lot about how to figure out how to deal with it in an understanding Israel-Palestine context, but it seemed highly relevant to me in terms of this Circles report that had come out. And I tried to get some of the Circles people who were on the report to do an interview with me to voice it themselves, but no one would take me up on it. But that's what actually set me. That happened. I was looking at that report, thinking about doing a show on that specifically, and I just want to refer to that. I didn't include tons of material on it in that segment. I basically just read from pieces of the report. But what really stuck out to me is that, contrary to like Pegasus, remember there's actually sort of three main categories here. Actually, I think of this Israeli cyber weaponry. The technology that's really front and center. One is that company that was used in order to hack the iPhones by the FBI, Celerite or something like that. That's a key one, I think, because that's about brute forcing the bypassing security in an iPhone. And that, of course, is going to come up more and more too, because we don't know exactly how that's done, right? There's all these different layers of digital technology, of cyber technology, right? Before you even get to the software layer, there's hardware layers running. And this is one of the important points that Brendan O'Connell has harped on, actually, is this question of the hardware, the chipset, the compromise of the chipsets, how damning it is that Intel, a company that was born out of it's as Silicon Valley a company as there is, including this sort of the immigrant Jew, Andy Grove, who helped start it. And then in the wake of that, it's basically largely exported at some level, at the very least in terms of research and development, to Israel. And now Apple, it's very interesting. Apple has now gone beyond Intel. Of course, you can still buy Intel chip apples, but now Apple is producing its very own chipset for the very first time, I think. Maybe they did in the very beginning, but I don't think so. I think they started out with Power PCs, and then they moved into Intel, been with Intel for a long time, but now they're producing their very own. And that's also, this is sort of kept a little bit quiet too when they announced this recent chip, this M1 chip, the Mac 1 chip, very effective and actually very consumer friendly too in terms of the prices for the computing power, because it's basically a new approach to consumer computing, that it's basically all of the experience that Apple has in the mobile domain in terms of their mobile chipsets, like the iPhone and the iPads and all that has to be done under conditions where you can't sort of drive tons of heat, and it's also compact. And so they learned how to really ratchet up efficiencies, chip efficiencies in relationship to that. And so now they're bringing that technology into their desktops and their laptops and stuff like that. But what's not been really emphasized, it's been kept sort of hush. I mean, it was, focused on in some of the Israeli media and some of the Jewish media, but Johnny Saruja, I think that's his name. He's Israeli. He's I think he's actually of Lebanese Christian background, but he's Israeli, and he's the leader of that hardware chip crew. And it did say that it looks like large portions of the design of the chip was being done in Israel. Okay.
By the way, you're talking about Johnny. It appears to be Saruji. His name is spelled JOHNY SROUJI.
Thank you, Johnny Saruji. That's correct, right? And what is his? Is he Lebanese Christian in background?
He is. Yes, he was born in Haifa, Israel, to an Arab Christian family originally from Lebanon.
Okay. Yes. And so that's interesting. And so as Intel sort of seems to bite the dust, Apple's on the rise here, and yet still this question of hardware and why the heck that we are not able to produce in the United States these kinds of chipsets in-house, then we'll deal with the software, because then we're dealing now with the sort of corporate outsourcing sort of cover, which of course is the way that Talpiot specifically works. It's basically Netanyahu saying the firms, what we did was fuse Soviet, long-term scientific planning, bring the engineers and fuse it with the American supercharged Silicon Valley capitalism, and we did it in Israel. And actually, that's the final segment of that radio show. Is I read from certain pieces of the Shock Doctrine of Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine, the second to last chapter, I think it is, called Losing the Peace Incentive, Israel as a Lesson, or something like that. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there, including about like checkpoint and all that, but and I've described this multiple times, so I'm not going to go back over it, but that whole dynamic there that Netanyahu, and remember, Naomi Klein points out that it was Stanley Fischer. Wasn't Stanley Fischer then brought back into the United States? I think he was, right? He was not the head. Was he the head of the Fed? Stanley Fischer?
No, I believe Stanley Fischer was in there with I believe he was in there with Yellen.
He was the deputy under Yellen?
Double check. Yes, he was the vice chair of the Federal Reserve under Janet Yellen, yes.
And so it's interesting because here, all right, I'll just read this one chapter here, but I mean not chapter, but this one end of this paragraph. This is page 550 of The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. titled "Losing the Peace Incentive," and I pointed out, over and over that in this same chapter she basically disparages conspiracy theories, and I pointed out in my presentation at the Left Out Forum that, like, the shock doctrine. A lot of this is based on CIA weaponized MK Ultra psychiatry, right, where they use trauma-based mind control to snap people into a more pliable psychological warfare state. And I point out is, like, if it's the shock doctrine, then someone's going to do the shocking. The CIA psychiatrist didn't wait for someone to Stanley Weintraub, for example, did not wait for one of his subjects to sort of just fall and stick their finger into a electric socket in order to make their move on the shock. And so, of course, that's the big quote unquote failure here with Naomi Klein. And but what she points out here is very interesting. Okay, quote, page 550. The losing the peace incentive. Israel as lesson. All right, I don't know. Israel as warning is actually the subtitle. Okay, quote, when the market for these services and devices exploded, talking about terrorist profiling, security, surveillance, all of that, exactly as you remember what Netanyahu said in that little clip I included, where he said, just all these, cyber companies just popped up, and then now we're selling $15 billion to, Mobileye, to Intel and everything, right? But here's what it points out. Quote, a slew of new startups were launched specializing in everything from quote unquote search and nail data mining to surveillance cameras to terrorist profiling. And of course, part of this chapter points out that it was on the verge of collapse, the entire Israeli economy, based upon on how dependent it was on technology around the dot-com bubble of around the millennium, and that the government pushed, it basically sucked out money out of public programs and then pushed a lot of it into these cyber companies, into surveillance and cyber warfare and all of that, in order to save the economy, really. And then boom, September 11th. And of course, my point is that, yeah, right. Who does the shocking, Naomi Klein? Okay. Quote, when the market for these services and devices exploded in the years after September 11th, the Israeli state openly embraced a new national economic vision. The growth provided by the dot-com bubble would be replaced with a homeland security boom. It was the perfect marriage of the Likud party's hawkishness and its radical embrace of Chicago school economics, as embodied by Sharon's finance minister, Benjamin Netanyahu.
And that right there, even that little excerpt just brings up a lot of interesting historical questions regarding, obviously, as we've known, like the Chicago school for being a combination of like, almost like where you have this libertarian and neocon combination of like economics is like an intersectioning point. So there's a lot of interesting questions that arise out of even the what is being mentioned here with the influence of the Chicago school, even on the economic thinking of someone like a Benjamin Netanyahu. So
that's really interesting too, because then you think about the Chicago is also the birthplace of the American neocons. And Strauss, right? And Wolf. I mean, that's so it's so interesting, that combo there, right? And they go back to Supermob. It's very interesting. Chicago as the epicenter of the American Jewish supermob, and then these two fairly explicitly sort of quote, as Naomi Klein calls them, radical. They're Jewish dominated, movement, so called, right? The economics, Milton Friedman. And all of the people that came out of that, including, Alan, what's his name?
Alan Greenspan.
Alan Greenspan. But then you have the actual neocons coming out of Chicago too. So I think that's pretty interesting. But the other thing that's interesting piece about that, Greg, in terms of what we've been talking about, is this question of Sharon and Netanyahu. And so when Netanyahu's talking about marrying Soviet long-term science and engineering with Silicon Valley, he might be being much more literal than he lets on.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a lot to wrap. It's a lot to wrap the head around. But and one of the things you brought up is going back to Seth Abramson. How and what's missing in any type of like conversation about who's responsible for this hack. Donald Trump wants to blame China, and Mike Pompeo and whoever else wants to blame Russia. Right? I mean,
Russia.
there's
Yeah.
Russia, China. Meanwhile, and even and look, and this is not even taking out the question of like where there's a potential Chinese role in all this, but very clearly, as was laid out, I mean, like Russia and Israel, particularly in 2016, with a number of other foreign players, and also domestic players here in the U.S., worked hand in glove on this bigger operation to install Donald Trump into the White House here, and that's really just the tip of the iceberg from I'd say a short term and a long term. There's obviously a line there. It's even looking deeper into such things as you brought up through even old executive intelligence review articles describing Ariel Sharon as a Moscow secret weapon. And this is also even bringing up questions we've more explored, looking into the long-term aspects and dynamics of what even somebody like a Benjamin Netanyahu ultimately represents in terms of ultimate, where those allegiances ultimately lie, and you start to see something that even goes beyond. And we've been talking about this more and more. There it is, a Moscow secret weapon, Ariel Sharon and the Israeli mafia, and this would be right in the early March 1st, 1986. This would be in the early stages of the mass immigration out of the former Soviet Union into Israel, but also into the West as well. And so,
Oh yeah.
but there's questions of the long term, and we've been talking about this among ourselves, like this goes outside of even like this hard right, very hawkish Likud element in Israel. It's bigger than just even Israel itself. It's like we've been known simply like American foreign policy has been held hostage by Israel, and obviously there's a ton of obviously you have to take into the gargantuan influence of say the Israel lobby and of the Zionist influence just overall in government and media, etc. But in terms of like really what we're looking at with the hardline aspects, and there's Dr. Kissinger. uh, what we're looking at, I mean, it's bigger than just like even Israel itself as we know it, and really it's extremely, I would say, I can't prove that I can't prove you like Ariel Sharon or Benjamin Netanyahu or like long term like Soviet agents operating out of the state of Israel. But I mean, I think that there's a strong case to be made for that. And it's very interesting, even looking at Sharon and Netanyahu, the two Israelis who were forefront in the forefront, along also with the Epstein compromised Ehud Barak in pushing for the catastrophe in Iraq. And so I think it raises a lot of interesting questions. And you and I were just recently going back and watching parts of Netanyahu's address
Yes.
to Congress, to I believe, was it the House Foreign Affairs Committee?
No, it was maybe the oversight committee or something
House
like that.
Oversight
Yeah.
Committee in September of 2002, where both me and your wife, Lori, described what Netanyahu was doing as almost like a shakedown of the Americans. Like, you do this for us or else. We've
Yeah.
always and what
Or
we
there'll be
also
bigger
described.
boom. He almost does. He basically, of course, he says the threats from Saddam Hussein, but he threatens a bigger nuclear weapon, basically.
Yeah. And so something we've been putting together here is like I think I don't want to get stray too far off course from specifically talking about what's going on with this solar winds hack, but in terms of a bigger conversation, what we're laying out here with and of course we go back to those who like to poo-poo all this as being a nothing burger and everything is simply being an attack on Russia. I would say from a bigger perspective, there's a couple of narratives I think that kind of run prevalent within like the circles of influence, like who's as far as like which foreign entity is to like blame for like for compromising the Americans, so to speak. And you have this camp of people that are very much centric in the idea that and we've seen this laid out through aspects, even people like maybe within the Narrative Live crew, Zev Shalev's program, some of the people running his circle, that the U.S. and Israel were both compromised by Russia, basically the Russian mafia. That the problem with Israel is that Benjamin Netanyahu is basically controlled by the global Russian mafia, right? He's basically an agent or a puppet of theirs. And also the Americans, the innocent American experiment was overran and manipulated and taken over by the
Trump.
hostile subversive foreign elements, which led us to Donald Trump as far as like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
innocent American experiment and all the things that leaves out from the of our own issues of criminality. And I would say even looking to like people like Sarah Kinzier, I think you get a more morally
Balanced.
balanced picture of like the actual like the lack of quote American innocence, so to speak, also really dealing very much with this very real foreign threat. So that's one
And
line.
from the American liberal of good faith perspective, that's why I see like Kenzier's voice versus some of the apologetics and hand waving of the Narrative Live crew around some of the actual American stuff and also the Israeli stuff.
And so you have this mindset of like, you know, the Americans and the Israelis were both like Trump and Netanyahu are the end results of the subversive Russian influence into their respective societies. So then there's another aspect at play that is all about like, you know, the America is simply a vessel of these of, you know, America's basically controlled by Israel, and you hear so much of that prevalent through so much of what we know as the alternative media. You know, America controls Israel, or even also the other side of that, which is through the some of the more leftist circles that it's that America, you know, either America's running Israel or Israel's running America, but ultimately, like, America is the reason why Israel's able to commit all of the things it does in the world. But from this perspective, you also see a narrative arising where this basically heroic perspective is taken of like Russia is the foreign power that's like standing in the way of this you might call it Anglo-Zionist global hegemony. So there's that aspect where you have this like see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil when it comes to the problems with the American empire, and also an attempt to absolve Israel of its very real and very deep long-term problems that are I would say pretty well established. And then this other aspect of where, you know, Israel runs the show, controls everything, and American Zionist neocons control everything, and so I think we need to have like a balance where we can honestly deal with all three of these entities and the truths of the matter about the because even Israeli society, I mean, I think it's very obvious that there's been a shifting into a much more extreme direction than what was there before in terms of the overtly Soviet, Russian, Eastern European nature of the immigration into Israel, as well as into our country with the rise of the replacement, basically, of the old school Italian Zionist American mob alliance with this foreign centric organized crime interest that were replaced by, say, the Rudolph Giuliani's of the world and installed, which ultimately led us to Donald Trump. And I think a lot of the current moment that we're seeing with the shape of American politics and what I talked about in our last live stream with the takeover of the GOP by, I would say, strictly foreign interests. So you have that, and we need to be honest about the nature that there is something very real to that with both American and Israeli societies being transformed by this. But at the same time, we also need to be very real about our crimes, the history of the American criminal aspects of the American system, as well as obviously the deep-rooted problems with Israel and its own in-house issues over the establishment of the state of Israel and the long-term aspects of the Zionist movement. So I think we need to move in a direction where we can try to speak about all of these things and in a way where like you're not trying to absolve anybody of like their own respective problems and issues, but also dealing with this very, I would say, current moment, this understanding of like that our societies have been we have been moved and have been I don't want to be careful to use the term takeover, but very much our societies have been heavily influenced, I would say, in a very negative direction by this foreign centric onslaught into not just the United States. This might be hard for people to maybe come to grips with, but even, you know, Israeli society as well. And so we've seen a move into a more the dynamics we're seeing playing out here are not just simply like American centric or even Israeli centric, so to speak. It's something different altogether, and it's very global, and it's outside of both of those realms just as we know them.
For example, and I think we mentioned this before, but that online seminar that I heard with that Mossad guy talking about the Iran deal and making it very explicit that it was Netanyahu was the main one that was trying to undo the Iran deal, that there was a lot of high-level Israeli national security types that really supported the general thrust of it. And yes, they wanted to, you know, make sort of push it to where Iran was more supplicant based, probably, or it was a little bit harsher. Some of the terms were maybe a little bit harsher in terms of the surveillance of the Iranian programs, probably. But in general, they supported the thrust of that because they actually, it was actually about, in their minds, Israeli national security. But the Netanyahu types were really about undermining that, probably very largely because of the maintenance of the geopolitical strategy of tension, the theatrics of it, Iran as the enemy in many ways. And also, and this is also part of our evolving theory, I would think, and I would hypothesize, then you look at Sharon, right, and as she's talking about, as Klein's talking about, Netanyahu, when he's actually doing all of this tall peot long-term planning, the corporate espionage that's combined with the supercharging of 9/11 and the investing in all of the Israeli startups, the startup nation, and the shadow side of that, as Silverstein was talking about, that it was when he was Sharon's finance minister, right? That Netanyahu was actually making a lot of this happen. Right, the economic side of it. That's, remember, in that Levin interview, he always talks about it comes down to the economics. It's all about the firms. But then out of that comes security. I can't hear you, Greg. Were you?
Oh,
just
I'm
saying?
sorry. You were referring to we broke it down in a previous, one of our previous episodes, how the Talpiot program works. You're referring to Netanyahu's interview with Mark Levin on Life,
Yes.
Liberty, and Levin on Fox News from 2008.
Life, Liberty, and Levin, in that order. Yeah. And really that is a crucial one, because he really describes it in these APEC speeches. He also describes it's basically a troika of powers that he's talking about. He's talking about economic power. He's talking about security power, but then he talks about which will result in diplomatic power, right? And so that's one piece. So while Netanyahu is working as Sharon's finance minister, he's implementing the economic transformation of this long-term program, and then he becomes prime minister again to implement the security, and then ultimately he's in the realm of the diplomatic stuff. And this is why this solar winds thing is really crucial, because there's a large scale diplomatic destabilization going on. And so one piece of, I think, our evolving hypothesis around these figures like Sharon and Netanyahu is fairly leading a really militant minority in the Israeli security sector to try to overthrow the West Obama push to reincorporate Iran into the liberal world order in many ways, right?
It's almost like Israel, needs to keep alive this constant and the Iranian enemy, the Iranian threat. It's a continuation in a lot of ways of Netanyahu's primary role in drafting and helping to draft and bring about what became the war on terror through the push of the constant. You have the constant need for the enemy. As it's been talked about here in our domestic lexicon, it went from the Soviets to it became the Muslim world after the end of the Cold War. You constantly need that new enemy to justify whatever military and moves that you're making, and to justify constant military defense spending, etc. And I think similar with Israel from a more global geopolitical perspective, you need the enemy. You need to have that enemy out there. And then this also becomes interesting because then you even go back to we talk about classic example long term with the we've laid out as more like the stage, the kind of the theatrical dynamics of the artificial Cold War, with in terms of the capitalist West versus the Soviets and whatnot, and Soviet communism. And of course, we've laid out a scenario where more or less there seems to be both during the Cold War and even now, a playing of both sides going on in a lot of ways. And so the Russian aspect with the whole Iran thing becomes very interesting, because publicly Russia
and maybe the China too.
Yes, and China as well. I mean, especially when we talk more about what is being called the multipolar world, and the shift basically of power from the West to the East, and that's in terms of like Trump basically lessening America's presence in many of these places throughout the world, while also keeping a back door for people like Eric Prince type private unaccountable military operations to take the place of the boots on the ground American military. But even going back to Iran, publicly is seen as like this defender of Iran because
Who did you
Russia
say?
supports the
You
Iran
just stalled
deal,
out there.
and
Who did you say was the
oh,
defender?
I'm sorry,
Putin?
Russia's seen like
Yeah,
takes
yeah.
this Russia seems to take this public role of like defending the Iran deal and all this. But meanwhile, at the same time, though, Russia very much was, at least I would say from a Putin perspective, was very much supportive of Donald Trump, obviously playing a major part of this global operation to bring Donald Trump in, the man who ran on destroying the Iran deal because Iran is like the number one threat facing the world. And well, I guess number two after China, but you know what I mean. And then even seems like what we've seen with like what appears increasingly, I think, is the case that the Russians are actually working to control Iran's presence and contain Iran's presence in Syria. So this is a very interesting dynamic, even when you bring like the Russian role in
Yeah,
terms of the Iranian thing from a global perspective. And there you go, once again playing that up there. But even going back to Netanyahu being the person to push for the breaking up, keep
yes,
the hell out of this Iran deal. But
that's the
in a
point.
deeper
Yes.
perspective, there's definitely there's still a coordination going on there. I largely think, even with like the public presence of like the Russians being seen as like standing up against the Americans and maybe even the Israelis in terms of their aggressive hawkishness on Iran.
But yes, but even more that it's similarly to this war on terror and the destabilization, and going back to what you referenced of Netanyahu in the American Congress shaking them down hardcore in the run up to the Iraq War. And this is, remember, this is almost we should go watch that whole thing again. I know people have pulled clips out of it about how free societies he says free societies have to be bombed into going to war. He says all kinds of outrageous
By
things.
the way, I also caught sitting behind Netanyahu during this testimony is a young Ron Dermer, the American-born, moved to Israel's ambassador to the U.S. Ron Dermer, who, by the way, was the co-author of Natan Sharansky's Case for Democracy. Speaking of
Wow,
another
dude.
long-term, we went into the likely long-term asset tree, agent tree of Natan Sharansky, I believe, on our September 11th stream this year. So
I'm so glad that you found that. It's so interesting. That's a book that maybe now we need to get, because I always reference the Sharansky's role with that book, and how Sharansky was Bush's go-to guy for the democracy justification for the Iraq War and all of that. And there's Dermer, dude, right? Right there in both those places. Because remember the timing of Netanyahu, and that's the fall of 2002, same time as the Israel Project, I think it was called, that I referenced before, and the same time as Epstein and Junkerman in the Wexner mansion in the hills of the UK, like the Johnny Vedmore articles. Go look at those again, and all of that ramping up. But that push there, you can be seen as not, of course, not the mistake or the big blunder as we dealt with it when they were talking about the Iraq War, but that it actually created the vacuum in many ways. On top of the human suffering, there was the diplomatic destabilization and the American vacuum that was created from that. And similarly, as what you just referenced in terms of Iran, that the pushing the attempt to deconstruct and the effective deconstruction of it, of the Iran deal by Trump, the Putin BB asset, the destruction of the Iran deal with the with us, basically created another vacuum, probably on purpose, in order to make room for Russia and China in relationship to Iran.
You have a 1-2 punch of Trump basically being brought in to destroy this deal that was made, and then basically the Americans begin to leave Syria and pave the way basically for the Russians and perhaps the Chinese and whoever else to take over the operation there. And then, it seems that as a result of that, the Russians are pushing back and containing the Iranian presence in Syria. This could be seen as a 1-2 controlling, at the very least, controlling of what's seen as the Iranian threat. And I would recommend real quick a new article. I'm not going to get to it right here, but article by we've discussed this name in the past on our programs. Andrew Karibko. he's a geopolitical analyst. He's very much he's very I would say very pro-Russian, and he very much is a cheerleader for what you call the multipolar world. But he very much is like he wants people to embrace the Russia, what he sees as the Russia-Israel alliance in so many ways, in terms of like Russia and Israel working closely together to bring about the multipolar world. And he's very critical of like what we know as the alt media's like not wanting to deal with this, and like through a combination of what he calls the Russophilia and also the anti-Zionism. Like there's an unwillingness at the very least to deal with like the dynamics and the reality, I would say, of what appears to be the Russia-Israel relationship. But in addition to some of the other articles he's written over the past couple of years, he has a new article he's written titled "Russian Influence in the Mediterranean is Multipolar, Not Malign," where he once again revisits this Israel-Russia dynamic and just how he just what he believes just how closely these two are working about to bring about a multipolar world where basically the U.S. global presence is replaced by more or less Russia and China, with Israel being a key center player in all of this. So it's extremely interesting to have it broken down like that, because there's so much, I would say, almost like denial of this. And it's interesting that it's coming from somebody who's like in an openly like pro-Russian perspective on this, who wants people to embrace this this relationship. And so I think it's very clear that this is in a deeper geopolitical scale going on. So
Yep. Yeah.
and I'll mention one more article, and I'm not going to get into, but there's also an article that was written by the name is Agha Hussein, and it's from June of 2019, and the article is titled Russian Media's pro-Zionist bias. Russia is a realpolitik player, not a principled one. And it gets into just how like Russian state media that operates here in the West, such as RT and Sputnik, are very much about pushing the war on terror, and you might call the bigger clash of civilizations, through many, through its headlines of in terms of pushing for very, very pro, war on terror type clash of civilizations editorial lines and article titles. And it gets into particularly this article. I just want to mention this real quick. Also details an RT, I believe it's RT's Middle East bureau chief, a woman by the name of Paula Slyer, a very interesting person. So
how do you spell Slyer?
Paula Slyer, Slier.
Okay.
Paula Slyer, and her role in some of the aspects of her background, combined with also the very much he argues the pro-Zionist, pro-war on terror editorial direction of RT in particular, but Russian state media that operates here in the West in general. So when we get this show uploaded, I might not do it immediately, but within the next as soon as I get a chance to, I will add these articles into our into the show notes here on the live stream. So.
Okay,
but I want to bring up these articles as being
of
what we increasingly need to deal with, and this is even out of something like this hacking of this mass hacking of is that like in the context of trying to find like the culprit to blame between those who want to blame Russia, and those who want to dismiss this because they don't want to look at a Russian complicity in something like this. Whereas there's some very real dynamics that I think will go in the direction of perhaps from a bigger picture perspective of like what appears to be going on in terms of these relationships and these dynamics, and what you broke down with the very Talpiot related aspects of this, and the dynamics going on with cybersecurity and with the big tech companies. There, I think, creates a bigger picture of what might be closer to what is really going on with all this. And it's certainly not a definitive answer, but it's a lot of things to take into consideration, perhaps maybe connect some dots with a bigger picture of an event such as this one.
Definitely. And, track with the facts, but with also this bigger geopolitical context that you're talking about to help be able to like trace the zone in a way, to understand the dynamics that are going on, and as you're pointing out, to not allow yourself or those with certain kinds of, if someone says Russia, then they're totally discredited, or if anyone says China, then they're discredited, or any of this, or trying to sort of like lump it on sort of
but
an
also,
either or kind of scenario. But there are facts here that need to be pointed to in terms of the actual cyber pattern that looks like it does point to Russia. But my point, and I want to go through some of these links, and I'll include these links too in the show description, like you're talking about, Greg, for all these links, points to a very similar kind of scenario, as I pointed out on the radio show, of 2016 Trump operation, where it's Russia and there's some kind of Israeli back end here that I'm very suspicious of. And I'm not ruling out that there's some inside job dynamics, because also like some of the executives cashed out similarly to other stuff we've seen going on this year. That some of these there's some solar winds money being made in the days in the run up to it. So I'm not saying that there's not some Chinese dynamics or some inside job dynamics, but it looks very similar to me, a Russia-Israel component. And then also I would bring in the Jedi Cloud dynamics of where it's Microsoft in the front end and sort of acting as the access, and then it's being sort of the desk opportunities, the security is being supplied by the Israelis. And so we'll go into some of that, but you wanted to make a point. Sorry.
Oh, I almost forgot what my point was there real quick. I guess it's going back to even like what we talked about with like the understanding dynamics of Russia, China, Israel, but also doing it in a way. And I think this is something we try to do here. We're not always perfect at it, but trying to do it in a way that, like we describe, like our program is trying to destigmatize, like our personal, one of the personal things we like to do is try to destigmatize some of like what has been seen as more like the negative aspects of what you might call conspiracy culture. But also in terms of this, I'd like to try to analyze these elements without falling into like the negative way that they're covered, whether it's like people who just want to like make like a Bond villain out of Russia, right? Where like Russia's this all powerful villain, ultimately where you make everything about Russia, but don't really expose anything in the process of it. And then also obviously the very bad agents who are pushing
just cover it up,
this China thing as well, but also taking into aspects, the truthful aspects of like a China threat, but at the same time taking it out of the hands of those who just want to obviously are doing or portraying China in the manner that they are, going back to what we mentioned earlier with the Danny Shorehans, the Washington Times, and the Committee on the Present Danger of China and the Tucker Carlsons of the world. And then obviously the Israel factor, outside of the way I believe it's been very bad jacketed by the overtly anti-Jewish types in terms of the way like Israel, obvious like issues with, I'd say, the representations of Israel and Zionism, is trying to maybe almost, I don't know if it would be like a third way, so to speak, but just a way outside of like trying to analyze these threats without like trying to fall into
you do with the facts. Same as COVID. Yeah. That's my point, is that we don't start with our preconceptions or what we want to believe or what's politically expedient for our audience or for what we believe our reactionary politics are. We start with the facts and an analysis thereof, while then also understanding whether there's potential blind spots because of our geopolitical or political assumptions, whether for pro or anti, because there's that whole other faction, in terms of like Aaron Mate and Glenn Greenwald, and certain other parts of the alternative media fall into that too, where it's just sort of like Russiagate was total nothing. And Glenn Greenwald's like, but I know they're saying all this, but where's the evidence? And they don't do the journalism. Aaron Mate doesn't call up the companies and try to figure out what the actual evidence is. I can't hear you.
Aaron Mate would rather do softball interviews with Trump world accomplices like Rick Gates, all to prove that he's the good pro-Trump guy who says Russia had nothing to do with anything. So we got to give him a softball interview. Meanwhile, no mention of his financial dealings with the disgraced Elliot Broidy, among other people.
So there's these three elements of Israeli intelligence hacking. Cellebrite, I think it's one called Cellebrite, something like that, where it's brute forcing, and that's when I got off on the whole tip about hardware and the Mac chips and all of that, that there is that aspect that needs to be brought into this. Is not necessarily just software, nor is it necessarily just what we might call network hardware, which I'll point out next in terms of the Circle story.
You're referring to Cellebrite, Cellebrite, an Israeli digital intelligence company that provides tools that allow organizations to better access, analyze, and manage digital data. It's founded in Israel in 1999, and it is a subsidiary of a Japanese multinational company, Sunsoft.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. So there's that, which points to I don't know this for sure, but it hints in the direction of they're thinking about Israeli backdoors at almost a hardware layer, but potentially in terms of the chips and and other aspects of hardware. It may be that it's just a software break that they're doing with the iPhones and stuff like that. Then there's this NSO group, right? That's a software hack. It's basically it's spyware or malware that is then it's like a phishing attack for a phone or something like that, where that's where they use Khashoggi's buddy and basically, got him to click on something, and then they owned his phone, and then they owned his communications with Khashoggi. Seems similar. Something happened with Bezos. So that's Pegasus and NSO Group. But then the Circles story is very interesting. And Scott Stedman from Forensic News, who I also asked to interview, and it was a bad time. He like Richard Silverstein is dealing with Walter Soriano in terms of the reporting about him. They've dealt with a lot of legal blowback around that. But go look at Forensic News' recent story about Mark Warner's relationship, very close economic, it looks like, and a closest aide and manager of family funds, very close to NSO guy. And so remember the connection of Rod Rosenstein, the guy who defined the investigation into the 2016 election operation. He became one of their lawyers. And then you have this Mark Warner. He's at the highest level of Senate Intelligence. He's a co-chair of Senate Intelligence, and he looks like he has this close relationship with the NSO founder, is what it looks like. And Stedman got blowback from all kinds of people.
Omri Levy, founder of NSO Group. Yes. All
right. So that's crucial. And then Circles, it brings in a whole nother fold. And this is important for people to understand too. And I wish I'd highlighted this more in the radio show. But remember, it talks about, and they don't actually highlight this that much in their report, the Citizen Lab report on Circles. But the way that it looks like on the surface, the way they identified this was they found patterns in the checkpoint firewall technology. And, in Naomi Klein's book, of course, there's reference to Checkpoint. And remember, Checkpoint is a Talpiot start, Maurice Nacht, I think the guy's name is, and he took part in the Global ORT program. And so that's a key one, because if you go look at like Fortune 500 companies, large portions of them have Checkpoint firewalls. Right. And that's what we were going to find with this SolarWinds, is that part of the problem with it is that it's this outside contractor, of course, and it's a software, it's a systems management tool, basically. And it's contracted out to vast majority of Fortune 500 companies like Checkpoint firewalls, and also to large portions of the government too. And so that reminds me, of course, of NSA, the two chapters in James Bamford's book about the NSA post 9/11. The two chapters, wiretappers and techno-tyranny, all about the Israeli outsourcing by the NSA in relationship to Verint and NICE and Converse Infosys and all of that. And then, what's interesting is that Checkpoint, I think, is crucial in that, because what it shows is that this is exactly what Talpiot is, right? Because you have Circles, which is the software that basically bounces off or sets up a safe harbor in the Checkpoint firewall hardware in these networks. And the way that attack happened, it's a man-in-the-middle attack. And so the problem with it is also that it can basically, it's sort of like a stingray operation. You remember the stingrays, where like the police had access to these sort of alternative cellular towers? They would act like your phone cellular tower. It's sort of like that, but at a network level. And takes advantage of these older legacy systems in communication, and it sets up a man-in-the-middle attack using the checkpoint hardware as the safe harbor, basically. And the Circles software then goes in there and then intercepts, and what can do, it can disrupt things like two-factor authentication, like the whole crypto. A lot of crypto stuff is set up via certain two-factor authentication. For example, Rockfin, the company, they encourage you apparently to use to get your crypto that you earn from setting up a media operation on Rockfin on your phone, and proper crypto people know that you do not use your smartphone to actually do your communications around crypto because of this problem. And so then two-factor authentication can get disrupted. They can do fake text messages and all of that. So that's one level here. And checkpoint is crucial because it's Talpiot, and because it's so pervasive, it shows that these are back doors. This is what we've been saying, that this kind of technology can be utilized by a future Israeli military intelligence or a corporation to utilize to then do future attacks. And by the way, and this is why then you get into this question of Israel and China, for example, even in Startup Nation, again, Dan Senor and Saul Singer, the story of Israel's economic miracle, it points out that
forward written by Shimon Peres, is that correct?
Yes, it is. Who was it? Makovsky, who went to work right for him out of high school or whatever it was. Okay, by the way, here, listen to this paragraph in here. 1. Seeding a culture of innovation, the people of the book. So it talks about the Arab boycott and how, remember, this is, this whole Startup Nation Central was set up by Paul Singer. Remember that this is part of the Netanyahu strategy beyond just the kill switch diplomacy. It's a defensive strategy against boycott, divestment, sanction, and a similar kind of global movement that helped isolate the apartheid government in South Africa, who Israeli intelligence, of course, was working with via the anti-so-called Defamation League in the 80s and the 90s, in spying on activists, and activists got killed in the United States, right? Like Silverstein was talking about, he's worried about assassinations beyond civil assassinations taking place. They already happened, it looks like, in the United States via these exact same networks, decades ago at some level. Okay, here. Quote, today, Israeli companies are firmly integrated into the economies of China, India, and Latin America because, as Orna Berry says, telecommunications became an early priority for Israel. Every major telephone company in China relies on Israeli telecom equipment and software. And China's third largest social networking website, which services 25 million of the country's young web surfers, is actually an Israeli startup called Kulanu, which means, quote, all of us in Hebrew. It was founded by an Israeli whose family emigrated from Iraq. In the ultimate demonstration of nimbleness, the Israeli venture capitalists who invested in Kulanu when it was a Jewish social networking site have utterly transformed its identity, moving all of its management to China, where young Israeli and Chinese executives work side by side. And then talks about Gil Kurbs, the Israeli alumnus of Unit A200, also spends a lot of time in China. So that's I just bring that in because in terms of this question of solar winds and Israel is inserted so deeply in the back ends here, like that quote, basically 90% of China's telecommunications has some kind of Israeli hardware at the epicenter of it. Of course, that gives you massive military power and the ability to stage cyber attacks that can also, where you can cloak your involvement in it to some extent. Okay. All right, Greg, we got to let you go here soon, but can I run through a few of these stories in terms of solar winds?
Yeah, let's go for it. I've got a bit more time here. I'm good right now.
You okay?
I'm all right.
All
I'm
right.
working.
I know you got to work tomorrow morning,
but I'll be all right.
All right. All right. Let's see if I can share. I'm going to try to share the screen. I'm going to share the Brave browser. Okay. Can you see that now? No. Oh, it's too small. Hold on.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go.
All right. So I'm going to go just through a few of these stories. All right. This is it. this is interesting. This is what reminds me of Pentagon, Cloud, Jedi, and Adalom and Microsoft. Remember, Adalom, crucial company. I mean, it's invested in by, as I said in the radio show, it was invested in by the quote unquote Bill Gates of Israel. What's his name? The head of the Rad Group.
Zohar Zissapel.
Zohar Zissapel. Crucial name that Brendan always harped on. He's right about that. Like Zohar Zissapel. Crucial, right? The daddy of all of this, the Bill Gates of Israel. And he was a Series A investor in Adalom. Okay, that puts it at the highest levels. And of course, they're all three of the founders of it are Unit 8200, but also Talpiot, right? So it is explicitly a big corporate Israeli military intelligence espionage operation, right? And so remember what happens. Microsoft purchases Adalom, I think in 2015, 2016, it then creates this division, names it Azure Cloud App Security, and that's Adalom basically, right? And then the run up to the announcement of the whole idea of the Jedi Cloud contract, and then all of that in relationship to the last minute turn from Amazon, whose billionaire founder was targeted by Israeli military intelligence software via the Saudis, via Epstein's buddies, the Saudis, right? And then it turns to Microsoft. And so that's very interesting. Remember when we were in DC, Greg, and we gave Brendan access to all of these videos too that were in there too. The only person that we gave access to those videos directly was we had videos of me going into all of the military. What's that? I forget the name for that. Where they're a liaison. There was all the military liaison offices.
The congressional, I believe, it was the congressional military liaison offices for each branch of the U.S. military.
Yes, and they gave them a copy of the flyers that Brendan had made, and we probably should have given them a John Swin flyer, but I didn't know about them. I didn't have them at the time.
Right.
And and we probably should have given them, we could have been more professional with the full one-off sheets and stuff like that. But I explained it to all of them, and we went into every single liaison office there: Navy, Marines, Army, Coast Guard, even, right? I mean, we went into all of them, and some of them were
the Space Force at that time.
No, that was pre-Space Force. We would have told the Space Force about Talpiot, and we were, told them all about Microsoft and the Jedi Cloud and all of that.
I bet there's a significant Israeli-centric apparatus operating within Space Force. I just have a feeling about that.
Yeah. Well, especially with the guy, with the former head of the Israeli space, saying the alien coalition was not ready to meet with the humans yet, but the U.S. and Israel were together, of course. Yeah. All right. So here, let's look at all this. All right. Oh, this is that one that you were talking about before. Russia's media's pro-Zionist bias, right?
Yes.
Okay. There's that one. Aga Hussein. Ramadan 27-14-40. All right. Oh, look at them. They are really like each other. Look at that. Look at that.
Also earlier today, I'll try to post it later, but I had posted I'd sent you a link of Putin speaking to the it was on the Kremlin website. I have my phone off right now, so I can't pull it up at the moment. But Putin speaking to, I believe, the group that calls itself #1 global advocate for Israel. So
yeah. A Jewish Federation kind of group, associated group in Russia.
Like a global type of Jewish Federation, United Jewish Appeal, it seems like.
All right, so now look at this. Look at the timing on this, actually. We'll run through some of this. All right, so remember, 2015, Microsoft buys Adalom, highest level Israeli military intelligence. Then incorporates it as cloud app security, right? That includes, I think, the whole Microsoft 365 suite that's cloud served to all the customers. That includes most of the federal government too, right? They're using Microsoft, right? All right. So look at the date on this, March 9th, and we'll see the stories that what happened was what it looks like that happened, and they're calling it a supply side hack, basically. And what that means is instead of that, they're just sort of like hacking into the system through the firewalls themselves, for example, finding a way in after it's all set. This group, this advanced persistent threat group, as they call it, wherever they're from, they found a way into the software building architecture of SolarWinds. So they implanted this malware or these, hack kernels into that software, and then SolarWinds delivered it to its tens of thousands of customers. It looks like, of course, you're seeing the number. They said they reached out to 33,000 of their customers. SolarWinds, I saw that stuff. So that's going on here. That's a marker of something, obviously. But so then they basically exported it, supply-sided it, this hacked kernel, into all of these customers. And it looks like it was targeted for these high-end government customers. All right, look at all the stories with like remember how much we focused on when Trump began replacing the head of the Nuclear National Security Administration, or whatever it's called. And then they are apparently have been hacked in some way in relationship to this. But of course, Commerce, Treasury, Secret Service, White House, Pentagon, and there's some other stories too in terms of the FBI, long-term FBI compromise by the Russians that has never been really publicly told until this last week. But all right, so you have Adalome 2015 purchased, 2016 renamed as Microsoft Azure Cloud App Security. So look what you have here going on. This is SolarWinds at the Orion platform. That's the network management software platform that was compromised. Okay, this is March 9th, and so basically, and we'll include some of the links to this. But now look, Kim Zetter, who's the one who wrote the book about Stuxnet 0 Day, she did some good reporting on this, and she basically found that it looks like that it was actually back in October of 2019 that there was that was the latest date that there was a test run by the hacking team in relationship to this access to the build software system of SolarWinds. Meaning, what they did is it looks like they did something like a placebo. They basically inserted something in there and saw whether it would be distributed, but then also saw whether they would get caught, and see whether they could cover their tracks. So the other way I sort of imagine it is like what that medical process where they insert like some kind of translucent dye, sort of a bluish dye, to sort of trace your system. And I think that's might be also part of it, to see where it went, see who took up the updates of the Orion platform. So, but that's when they tested it by then. March 9th here, look at this announcement. This is the original story, was saying that they had gotten into the system with the actual, that the kernel, the hacked kernel had already been delivered by March around there of earlier this year. They'd been into everybody's systems for more than half a year. And this is partially why the indicators that this is, high level nation state, that the tradecraft of this in terms of cyber and their ability to hide themselves and cover their tracks and move laterally in systems and be patient and come at this with a serious plan. I mean, sure, you could have like an organized non-state group of people who are dedicated enough, of course they could be patient enough. But the level of this looks like, that's why I think one of the indicators that they're saying it's a state level actor. So March 9th, SolarWinds announces, quote, "We are excited to announce that integration between SolarWinds Discovery and the SolarWinds Orion platform is now available. This new integration allows you to consolidate and gain visibility into IT asset information from the Orion platform within SolarWinds Service Desk." Okay. This is the key phrase here, SolarWinds Service Desk, all right? This is already a name change, similarly to that if you checked in with Microsoft in late 2016 or 2017, you would see it's been integrated with Azure Cloud App Security. But what they'd actually be talking about is Israeli military intelligence company, Adalome. Very same thing happening here with SolarWinds, as we will see here. It's called Samanage. Samanage is the name of the company that became SolarWinds Service Desk. And people are saying that they are highly tied into, the implication is that they have skeleton keys in relationship to the Azure cloud and Microsoft 365 deliverables is what it's sounding like. And so to me, you got to always think about like even Mossad operations at a hotel. Remember that one that went really bad when they were going to assassinate some people and they got caught. Think about if you're running an operation in a hotel, you got to have it's helpful to have an inside guy at the desk, at the front desk, at the service desk, the guy who's handling the calls, know who's checked in, and also, by the way, it looks like the service desk would be the one who'd ultimately be serving the supply side software update, the hacked or the poison pilled Orion updates would be via the service desk, very likely. And then that includes then this company's deep tie-in integration with the Azure cloud itself. Okay. All right. Here, we won't go deep into this, but I just want people to be aware of this story that's being missed in the midst of all of this other stuff. And okay, I think McLaughlin, she's interesting journalist, but this is all about, quote, exclusive Russia carried out a stunning breach of FBI communication system, escalating the spy game on U.S. soil, and talks specifically about FBI targeting high-level ability by Russians in the United States to compromise FBI communications. Think back to something like 9/11 and the run-up to 9/11. Or think about the DEA. Remember the DEA Israeli spy, the art student spy ring report. Part of the implications of that, it was that the FBI and certain justice and other federal investigator types had their communications compromised by the Israelis, basically, right? This is pointing out that the FBI, which was right in the midst of investigating the Russia, obviously also the Israeli and other Middle Eastern involvement in 2016, had compromised FBI communications back then. This is a very important article that people should go look at. All right. So back to SolarWinds. All right, here is Kim Zetter, who I was talking about. All right, I'm just going to read a few of these. Quote, I have a report from Microsoft about SolarWinds hack, including IOCs. I don't know what IOCs is. Excerpts in this thread, quote, Microsoft security researchers recently discovered a sophisticated attack where an adversary inserted malicious code into supply chain development process. A malicious software class was included among many other legitimate classes and then signed with a legitimate certificate. The resulting binary included a backdoor and was then discreetly distributed into targeted organizations, right? So think about binary weapons. There's also cyber binary weapons, like similarly to like a biological binary weapon.
IOC is indicator of compromise, by the way.
Oh, thank you, Greg. This attack was discovered as part of an ongoing investigation. Okay. We do not know how the backdoor code made it into the library. Research indicates the attackers might have compromised internal build or distribution systems of SolarWinds, embedding backdoor into a legitimate SolarWinds library. All right. And so this is where I think you begin to have some of the implications of, all right, where was this original gap? Okay, this is interesting. This has now been taken down, so I had to get this from the archive, but this was, everyone started going to SolarWinds customers, right? They were heavily advertising this until just last week, this last week. More than 425 of the U.S. Fortune 500 companies. Remember what I said about the numbers of checkpoint firewalls, Israeli military intelligence, Talpiot-based hardware as the security, right? And that's what you see too, is that even in things like virus, antivirus software, that becomes a very easy way to hack it too. All right, so all 10 of the top 10 U.S. telecommunications companies, all 5 branches of the U.S. military, SolarWinds customers. Pentagon, State Department, NASA, NSA, Postal Service, NOAA, Department of Justice, Office of the President of the United States, all 5 of the top 5 accounting firms in the U.S., hundreds of universities and colleges worldwide. Look at all these companies: Ameritrade, AT&T, Boston Consulting, Booz Allen, Blue Cross, Cablevision, CBS, Charter, Cisco, Nashville, Tampa. I mean, we'll see. There's another Credit Suisse, Dow Chemical. I mean, look at Federal Reserve, Federal Express. There you go, Federal Express. Fiber Cloud, Foundstone, Gartner, Harvard
Foundation,
Gates Foundation. Nice catch. General Dynamics. I mean, all right. Look, it's Hertz. I mean, it's everybody. Look at Microsoft. Yeah. Look at this. This is out of control. Okay. Yeah. So this, of course, is one of the problems here. What the heck is going on? Is it really the case that the NSA, that the United States government, doesn't have the technical resources to be able to create its own serious network analysis or network management software in-house? Come on. What the heck? So it's almost as if the corporatization or the outsourcing thing is part of the compromise itself. That's what it looks like to me. Of course, if you don't have a Pentagon cloud, then you can't award it to Microsoft, who's then has the Israeli military intelligence company in charge of its cyber app, it's a cloud app security. And of course, like we've covered the stuff where they've compromised the government itself too. Now, this is the only guy I've seen anywhere really talking about this question of Samanaj, this Israeli company. Okay, hey, look at this. Wow, this is a really powerful target. I think that was off of a Kim Zetter tweet. This is the key component of the monitoring agent you put on servers, and I'm pretty sure it runs privilege because it needs to reset services and perform other maintenance tasks. Remember the way I said in the radio program, God access or God door access, basically, right? So high level. So this guy, I don't know who this is, Judge John H. Woods Jr.'s ghost. Find it curious, they recently integrated Orion with a product, Samanaj, they bought from Israel. Bibi is in bed with Putin. Yes, right. Samanaj integrates with Azure. We'll be watching for more info on this, as there was a massive Azure outage on September 28th. Interesting. All right. Let's keep going through here. All right. So this is the guy, I believe, this is the guy who... this is the founder.
Click that X up there, Jeremy. Yeah, there you go. Okay.
This is the founder of Samanaj in the press. It was always talked about as a North Carolina company, which is another cyber hotspot. But okay, so Doron Gordon. And this guy is, I believe, is he's I think he's pretty anti-Trump actually too. So this is not simplistic, I don't think. But all right, Doron is a successful entrepreneur and the founder of CEO of Samanaj. Prior to founding Samanaj, Doron was a co-founder and VP of Sales and Marketing at Continuity Software, a leading provider of disaster recovery and high availability management solutions. Doron was a senior manager at BMC Software, a global leader in IT management software. He was also the founder and CEO at Always On Software, an innovative application service provider. Previously, Doron held various technical and sales roles at Crystal Systems and IDF Momron. Okay, look up Momron, right? That's basically, it's sort of DARPA. It's sort of like computer science, DARPA of Israel, the sort of computer focus of the IDF. But this is the point that I keep making, is that we're in a compromised position here because we're not a warfare garrison state per se, because we don't have mandatory service in the United States. So sure, obviously there's a lot of tie-ins between the military, Silicon Valley military, and cyber startups, definitely CIA, NSA, and cyber startups. But if you think about it as an individual level, if you think about it as Talpiot, as high-level corporate espionage, and the individual actors who could be able to pull that kind of thing off, we are a very soft target per se, because so few of the actual people who start cyber companies and who work at cyber companies in the United States who are American citizens have a military intelligence background in an American capacity. And so we're sort of soft sitting targets. All of these guys who start these companies that are then brought into the U.S. companies, they're all military. They're all military. They're all military intelligence, basically, right? There is a certain amount of command and control and training that is involved there that turns any kind of civilian sector into an easy target. Okay, so that's one point I just want to make about this. All right. SolarWinds hack exposes underbelly of supply chain attacks. Right, and this sort of goes into it, talks a little bit about the Russian aspect of it, and they're basically saying there's certain indicators. This is not as simple. This seems actually more sophisticated potentially than what was being ascribed to the GRU, Russian military intelligence cyber operations. This is being seen as SVR, basically, so Russian CIA level cyber, where they are moving very carefully and very discreetly, and moving laterally and patiently, like I said, inside of the network. And I don't know. I mean, sure, it's a good question Greenwald and Mate are asking, if they were asking it in actual good faith, if it didn't come along in the case of like Mate as totally writing off all of the crucial information about Russia's obvious involvement in 11/9, in Trump Russia, in the 2016 election. So it would be helpful to ask more journalistic questions about how we know it's Russia.
All at the center and the heart of the things that the issues that they profess to be so on top of, such as like issues of Israel, Palestine, and Zionism. But I digress.
Yes. All right. So this is, I just include this because it makes it points out the importance of how wide scale this is and why it's such a vulnerability, basically. Right, because this is quite a interesting way to attack a system. You basically turn it into it's cloaked as the actual update software itself, and then it's totally invited into everybody's systems. This is interesting. I hadn't read this. It's not the first time a supply chain attack has caught the cybersecurity community off guard. In 2017, hackers compromised Handbrake. I remember I've used Handbrake before, a video conversion tool, to distribute a remote access toolkit. The same year, hackers with suspected links to China laced malicious software in the file cleaning program CC Cleaner to ultimately target more than 2 million users. In perhaps the most globally infamous supply chain security nightmare to date, Russian hackers exploited a software vulnerability in Ukrainian tax software to lock up computers around the world. The U.S. has charged hackers linked with Russian Main Intelligence Directorate, or the GRU, for the NotPetya attack. The European Union has also sanctioned Russian hackers for the attack. And what the people who are saying that it's Russia, SVR specifically, are saying that this actually looks like the attack that they believe they have pinned down on SVR against, I think it was against Ukraine's energy, where they actually shut down the grid a little bit at some point. Okay. All right. There's that. All right, I'll include all of this. We analyzed, they leveraged 10 MITRE attack tactics. MITRE, that's interesting, including lateral movement and data exfiltration. Used techniques indicate that the threat actors are skilled. Okay, I'm just going to run through this and we'll sign off, Greg. Okay, tactics, techniques, and procedures used in the SolarWinds breach. Okay, I think it's important to just begin. This is hard for me to like figure out how to, understand all of this. Like I check in with my wife who does IT, and she knows, a lot of this, and she sort of can guide me in my understanding about whether my analogies are proper or not. And but it's difficult. I find it, we have to sort of find our way through new material in a way.
These are not simplistic matters, to say the least.
No, and I think they're important because they not only in terms of the forensics of this specific case, such as it's September 11th, the forensics become important at a level. If you want to make any serious assertive analysis about who did it and why, you have to have some ability to grapple with hard forensics, physical forensics in the case of 9/11, in order to make a political analysis. It's similar in this case. And as we move more and more to the cyber domain, we have to begin to, even those of us who are, fairly maybe even a bit Luddite, have to have at least a facility to be able to understand how some of this works, because we're going to have to address all of this from top to bottom to top, both in terms of our politics and our technology. And everyone keeps on hoping, that we're going to be able to amend, Silicon Valley and all these corporations. We're not. We're going to recreate our hardware and software, and so we have to know what's the problem is right now in order to know what to do when we actually get off our asses altogether and actually fix this from all the way. All right, here you go. Microsoft's role in SolarWinds breach comes under scrutiny. Microsoft has become ensnared in probes surrounding the colossal U.S. government hack, with media reports and company messages focusing on Office 365, Azure Active Directory, and a key domain name. Okay, so this begins to bring up in my mind Adalom again, and then this Samanage as the SolarWinds service desk provider with a deep background with Azure integration. Okay, so this is why I'm beginning to really think that Israel opened the back door. Not that Russia was not probably actually at the helm of this operation. It's possible that it was a false flag totally and that they're being framed for it, but I don't know. I think it's more of a 2016 operation where Israel's very likely involved and is sort of trying to keep itself in the shadows like we've talked about.
Yes, while Russia is like blamed front and center.
Yes. And remember, there's reasons for that geopolitically too, because if Russia is seen as at the very least, as a competitor, if not a nemesis, if not an enemy in these days, and Israel is still somehow seen as some kind of friend and ally, and so it's way different. That's why it's not just that it's a touch button issue. It's also that Israel is in this different category where we can't acknowledge that a quote unquote friend or ally would do these kinds of things.
And that's why I think it was so significant, even for like people like John Brennan, to call the assassination of the Iranian nuclear scientist the state-sponsored act of terrorism. And one last thing, we keep going back to this, is that it is the devotion to Israel of these leading democratic figures in Congress, I believe, that ultimately played a key role in undermining the scope and depth of the Trump-Russia investigation, because it would implicate Israel in a very obviously serious way. So
yes. Okay, this is what I mentioned before. Investors in breach software firm SolarWinds traded $280 million in stock days before hack was revealed. The timing of the trades raises questions about whether major shareholders used inside information to avoid stark losses after the attack. The company's share price has plunged roughly 22% since its role in the breach was revealed. By the way, Austin-based company SolarWinds, and we'll see later, even the entire city of Austin is apparently compromised by Russian intelligence of some sort. This is some crazy stuff going on here.
Well,
okay?
I mean, that may even raise new questions, even among things such as we were talking about, combination of like billionaires, I believe Elon Musk is resettling in Austin, as well as Larry Ellison, even.
Yes,
And
or Oracle, and
more questions about old Alex Jones and Infowars,
and Joe Rogan's moved to Austin.
Yes. But even so there's a lot of things.
And by the way, Rockfin's location in Austin. All right. But by the way, someone should go do a little bit of background on FireEye is interesting. That's the firm that they're the ones who actually discovered this, because they found that they had been compromised in someone trying to link up another device into their system unauthorized. And then they were like, how did that happen? How did they even have access? And then they found that they had incorporated this corrupted SolarWinds build. Okay, but go look into the background. And the guy who started FireEye is interesting. He's actually a Pakistani background, and his family seems actually fairly close to Imran Khan, actually, which is interesting. But he seemed to have been pushed out at some point as CEO, and then they put this sort of shady guy, Dave DeWalt, in at the head around 2016 or so. Maybe we're in that time, or that was when he went out. So look into FireEye, look into the background of the backers, the owners of SolarWinds. One of them is called Silver Lake, and then the other one I can't remember, but maybe we'll run into it here. Okay, Shlomo Kramer. It is an Israeli information technology entrepreneur and investor. He's the co-founder of cybersecurity companies Checkpoint and Imperva, as well as Cato Networks, okay, a cloud-based network security provider. I would think I looked this up when I was looking up Checkpoint, right? Gil Schwed and Maurice Nacht. Maurice Nacht is Talpiot. This guy's a big guy. This is a big player here, actually. All right.
And as previously said in his documentary, Unit 8200 veterans. So,
well, yeah, they're basically all that,
right.
or Momron, or whatever it is. Yeah. That's what this is. Israeli military intelligence, and it should be talked about it as such. These are not like startup companies. This is just an extension. These are Israeli military intelligence cutouts. Okay, this has been called Sunburst. Actually, there is this weird thing, right? Think solar wind. Remember, even like QAnon and the 10 days of darkness and solar wind, and this has been calling Sunburst, and it involves the potential compromise of it's related to the turning off of electricity in the Ukraine. And so there's an aspect here where it feels like there's that's the resonance. And then when I think of that, where they're indicating their 33,000 customers that they warned and stuff like that, there's something weird going on here, obviously. So I don't think it's quite as simple as, okay, just the Russians did this and no one else knew. This is a bigger thing. So it does look like, they're calling it, like some people are calling it, the cyber Pearl Harbor and stuff like that. And of course, Pearl Harbor, 9/11, all that stuff is much more complicated even than just sort of inside job or these sort of unexpected outside attackers or one country sort of doing it, or, so this belongs in that kind of understanding. This is a 9/11 style thing, I think. But 9/11 looks to have Israel as a prime mover, or at least a fixed point. And so it could be that the level of this in terms of the actual operation inside the system could be Russian fixed point or Israeli fixed point. We don't know. Or, maybe someone else, maybe China is way more sort of advanced in these ways than they're being given credit for. And maybe they have the ability to false flag, and it's some kind of bigger geostrategic
maybe there's
thing.
an element of truth to all of these people, all these entities being named and implicated. I mean, that could also be the case as well.
And now this is very interesting. This is from the president of Microsoft, right? A moment of reckoning, the need for a strong global cybersecurity response. And this is after the hack. But look at this. This is very interesting that what he mentions NSO Group in this as a potential bad actor, the president of Microsoft. So this is very interesting. Let's look that up. NSO. There you go. All this is changing because this is bolded. All this is changing because of a second evolving threat, namely the growing privatization of cybersecurity attacks through a new generation of private companies, where it has acquired its own acronym, PSOAs, for private sector offensive actors. Unfortunately, this is not an acronym that will make the world a better place. One illustrative company in this new sector is the NSO Group, based in Israel and now involved in U.S. litigation. Right? Rod Rosenstein on the side of Israel. NSO created and sold to governments an app called Pegasus, which could be installed on a device simply by calling the device via WhatsApp. The device's owner did not even have to answer. According to WhatsApp, NSO used Pegasus to access more than 1,400 mobile devices, including those belonging to journalists and human rights activists. NSO represents the increasing confluence between sophisticated private sector technology and nation-state attackers. Citizen Lab, a research laboratory at the University of Toronto, has identified more than 100 abuse cases regarding NSO alone, but it is hardly alone. Okay, so it's not just Israel. Okay, other companies are increasingly rumored to be joining what has become a new $12 billion global technology market. Okay, that's very interesting. That's who he highlights. This president of Microsoft. I just find that interesting. I don't know exactly what it means. All right, here's Intercept. Okay, but this is an interesting story here. Okay, Russian hackers have been inside Austin City network for months. Oh, you don't say. Russiagate's a total made up deep state global rat conspiracy theory bullshit. What? Meanwhile, they own my city. Meanwhile, they own our city. They owned our cyber. Look at it. Look at this crap, dude. Russia appears to have used Austin Network as infrastructure to stage additional cyber attacks deep behind enemy lines. We have allowed the Russian military intelligence to pwn our entire industrial cyber scenario.
That reminds me of Adam Green and bless his soul, the late Matthew North did a stream a while back where they were discussing like the Russian aspect of the InfoWars operations.
Yes, how prescient that turned out to be.
Yeah,
that's a good point, Greg. People should go back to that. Matthew North's legacy. It's some important analysis with Adam's help.
Yes.
All right. State-sponsored hackers believed to be from Russia. Okay, so Aaron Mate and Glenn Greenwald, that believe is doing a lot of work. Okay, or who do you think did it? Who do you think's pwning Austin? Aaron, did you do the journalism? Do you want to fill it in, or are you just gonna just asking questions? Okay. Have breached the city network of Austin, Texas. The Intercept has learned. The breach, which appears to date from at least mid-October, adds to the stunning array of intrusions attributed to Russia over the past few months. All right.
And see, they'll take advantage of this and they'll just say, the Intercept saying Russia, nothing to see here. That's what they'll tell their audiences, basically.
Yeah. And this is remember, that was the city of Austin was one of the SolarWinds, right? But SolarWinds is from Austin, right, too. But so obviously they're a hometown team. Then, so basically here it says, the list of reported victims includes the Commerce, Homeland Security, State and Treasury, the Pentagon cybersecurity firm FireEye, IT software company SolarWinds, and assorted airports and local government networks across the United States. The breach in Austin is another apparent victory for Russia's hackers. By compromising the network of America's 11th most populous city, they could theoretically access sensitive information on policing, city governance, and elections, and with additional effort, burrow inside water, energy, and airport networks. The hacking outfit believed to be behind the Austin breach, Berserk Bear, also appears to have used Austin's network as infrastructure to stage additional attacks, right? So, and then, so APT 29, right? And so, some of these names also like it makes it easy for the Aaron Mate types to be like, oh, it's just sort of like anti-Russian propaganda and everything's a bear. And it's true. It like makes it, so they use these, So both Berserk Bear and Cozy Bear are known for quietly lurking in networks, often for months, while they spy on their targets. Berserk Bear, which is also known as Energetic Bear, Dragonfly, Temp.Isotope, Crouching Yeti, and Bromine, among other names, is believed to be responsible for a series of breaches for critical U.S. infrastructure. I think Cozy Bear is GRU and Berserk Bear is SVR. Okay. All right, we're almost done here, Greg.
Okay.
You're a trooper. Okay, hackers last year conducted a dry run of SolarWinds breach. This is that Kim Zetter article I was talking about, just came out yesterday, where she talks about that it was actually in October. Quote, hackers who breached federal agency networks through software made by a company called SolarWinds appear to have conducted a test run of their broad espionage campaign last year, according to sources with knowledge of the operation. The hackers distributed malicious files from the SolarWinds network in October 2019. 5 months before previously reported files were sent to victims through the company's software update servers. The October files distributed to customers on October 10th did not have a backdoor embedded in them. However, in the way that subsequent malicious files that victims downloaded in the spring of 2020 did, and these files went undetected until this month. We're thinking they wanted to test whether or not it was going to work and whether it would be detected, so it was more or less a dry run, a source familiar with the investigation told Yahoo News. They took their time. They decided not to go out with an actual backdoor right away. That signifies that they're a bit more disciplined and deliberate. Okay, that's interesting, and because that's the first time it's been mentioned. Until that report, it was always said it was just earlier in March, but this means it's been basically they've at least had access to do this for almost a year, at the very least. Okay. In an SEC filing, SolarWinds says, quote, the vulnerability was not evident in the Orion platform product source code, but appears to have been inserted during the Orion software build process. All right, and here's this guy, Judge John H. Wood Jr.'s ghost again. He says, reckon my Samanage theory might hold some water. I reckon that's true. I think your Samanage theory might hold some water too. The domestic press releases never mention its Israeli roots. As soon as it was integrated with Orion, this started. Go for it.
Oh, on this note, we were talking about how like the Glenn Greenwalds and people like that, Aaron Mates, will use like the overemphasis on Russia to dismiss any and all aspects of like any type of inquiry. But also at the same time, there will be people who will run with things like, the Israeli aspects of this not being mentioned to just simply point the finger at just Israel as if there's not any other aspects at play as well. So look out for that as well.
True, definitely. And this is why this kind of thing is so important. In like similar to like 11.9 And that operation, it's so obvious that both the sort of Russian and the Middle Eastern pieces are used against each other to help cover it up, either by highlighting one, denying one, or in the way that we talked about the way that Israel, as the control aspect, obviously in the American Congress, I mean, more and more Russia is obviously a control aspect, especially with the GOP, but Israel, is the sort of much more bipartisan lever of control, as we pointed out, and about the Democrats and why the investigations went nowhere substantial around 11/9, except for tiny bits of Russia.
Makes me wonder if somebody like Ron Johnson's trying to punish a punishment for Trump as holding these checks that even Josh Hawley's presenting himself as a populist hero on. So I don't know, but
yeah, yes.
Who knows?
All right, so here's the reporting on when SolarWinds buys Israeli startup Samanage for $350 million, right? April 2019. And now, since we're finding out that October of 2019 was the latest that this operation began in relationship to them feeding the placebo code into the software supply systems, basically. Now we begin to understand, okay, yeah, this timing is very interesting, like that guy was saying, and also reminiscent of what I'm talking about the Pentagon Cloud and Microsoft and Adalom, okay? And this is the same exact thing, right? This sort of the purchase of the Israeli startup. And remember, even Adalom, I think, had a I think it had a Silicon Valley address, so it was an American company or whatever, same thing with here. That's what this guy keeps pointing out, is that the American media is always just talking about it as a North Carolina company. Meanwhile, this guy, the guy who started, he worked at the highest levels of Israeli computer intelligence, basically, right? It's IDF, right? Okay.
This is just the latest long pattern in history of Israel's deep role in things being very concealed from the public, to say the least.
Yes. Okay, this talks a little more background on FireEye. I'm going to skip that for now in terms of the way FireEye discovered it. This quote tells us the actor had access to SolarWinds environment much earlier than this year. So she's referring to this story that she wrote. We know that at minimum they had access October 10th, 2019. That intrusion has to originate probably at least a couple of months before that. Probably at least mid-2019, if not earlier, okay? Timeline. So you're talking now we're moving back into summer towards spring of 2019. All right, so the strategic implications of SolarWinds. This is an interesting article. I haven't really gone through this carefully. Remember, Department of Energy, the nukes, all of this, and these guys were part of this Cyberspace Solarium Commission, which is interesting to look into. All right, here's the announcement. Samanage is now SolarWinds Service Desk. SolarWinds Service Desk, formerly Samanage, is an IT service management solution, ITSM, that will continue to scale with your service needs as they grow across your organization. Okay, by the way, I'll just play this video really quickly. Watch this. Watch this. Watch for these email addresses, where they're coming from. I think this is the one I'm thinking of. We'll see. I'm going to turn this down. Yeah, weird. Okay, I'm gonna keep going, and maybe it'll pop up as we're going here. All right, just released by FireEye, confirming signed updates from SolarWinds enterprise monitoring software were backdoored. This is the real deal, folks. Right, and so actually, this is a very important doc. Oh, okay. Oh, shoot. Sorry. Let me go back to that. Okay, hold on.
Oh, it's going very
spinning
slow.
Again. Here, maybe I'll just try to pick the. I just want to try to pick the screen that I'm thinking of right now. Detail. I have not include the ability to transfer files, execute files, profile the system, reboot the machine, and disable system services. The malware masquerades its network traffic as the Orion Improvement Program (OIP) protocol. Considerable engineering went into evading detection, including steganography. Quote, HTTP response bodies attempt to appear like benign XML related to .NET
It's a
assemblies.
multi-tenant SaaS platform.
Oh,
always working with the latest version. Built by IT.
Oh, let's see. Oh, look at this. All incidents. Oh, water spill resolved 190. Water resolved on my laptop. Oh, it's from Tel Aviv. Marketing priority medium. Oh, 189. These are like tickets, right? The service desk, right? 189. Assigned. Oh, it's someone's mouse's desk. Oh, they're in Tel Aviv too. Marketing. Oh, resolved 188. I broke my standing desk. I send help, right? Oh, Tel Aviv marketing. Okay, so the first three here, right? So it sort of shows, right? This is actually probably, they probably wrote this up. All right, then there's others, executive carry customer service. So I just wanted to show that, this is sort of their marketing, scenario here, incident. Okay, but
I believe Cary might be North Carolina. I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right. That's a key epicenter, like Cisco and stuff like that. All right, so here it is. When did Salmanage become SolarWinds Service Desk? In April 2019, SolarWinds announced a signed agreement to acquire Salmanage, with plans to add the Salmanage products to its operations management portfolio in Q2 2019. The Salmanage service platform was relaunched as SolarWinds Service Desk, right? The moment where they buy it in first quarter or end of beginning of second quarter, and then they rename it in the summer, right? It's sort of Autoloam. It's Autoloam, but a sped up thing. Autoloam bought, and then the next year renamed as this head of their cloud app security at Microsoft. And now, all right, this is Salmanage. It's now SolarWinds Service Desk, and that is an Israeli military intelligence started company, right? Or at least the guy who started it, the co-founder, he's Mamran, IDF. All right. So there's this, and then finally. Oh, this is an interesting background of some of these other 5 Russian hacks that transformed U.S. cybersecurity from the BBC. Cuckoo's Egg, Cliff Stole, Moonlight Maze in the 1990s, Buckshot Yankee. In 2008, the rogue USB stick loaded with malware, allowed hackers to penetrate classified U.S. military systems, including CENTCOM, or someone caught it at CENTCOM or Central Command. And then there's U.S. Cyber Command that was started apparently as a response to that. The Democrats. In subsequent years, China began to receive more focus, particularly with regard to stealing commercial secrets. And I don't even know if they identified who this was. Okay. But Russia had not gone away, and then finally Sunburst. And then we'll just finish here, I guess, right? The exact impact of the Sunburst breach through the company SolarWinds is not yet clear. Nonetheless, federal officials talk of a, quote, grave risk because of the sheer scale of possible compromise of departments, companies, and organizations. It is not espionage as usual, Microsoft President Brad Smith argues. So, all right. So this is still evolving, and I think it's a big deal, and so it needs to be identified as such and deconstructed so that these very simplistic approaches to it are not left in place. I mean, it's wild that that's sort of, there's very little looking into this question of this Salmanage Israeli intelligence, and the parallel, to the Jedi cloud is basically, almost no one talking about that as a possibility, but it looks like it should be front and center on the possibility table.
Yeah.
All right.
Definitely.
Anything else, Greg?
It's about things I go into, but I think right now I'll probably just it's a pretty good point to probably end on. So unless you have any other final thoughts.
No, I think we just should go to bed.
We'll
I
have
guess.
to do another. I guess we'll have to maybe get together here sometime in the sometime in the near future. Maybe talk some of the maybe give some perspective on some of the still ongoing potential Trump moves that are being made that are related to a lot of things. And once again, that's another case of dissecting away from the noise and like actually trying to get to like what may or may not actually be going on. But I mean, might have to revisit that that realm of thinking. But obviously right now this is very key to whatever's going to happen, like with the end of Trump and the incoming of what's to follow Trump. And it's interesting, almost like with something like this, I don't know, this is pure speculation here, but is something like this, especially if we're thinking about like this whole like 2016, what we call 11/9 operation coming back into fruition again, is something like this timed in the aftermath of their asset / agent not winning his election? I don't know.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, I don't know.
There's a lot to keep an eye on, and like eventually, I want to try to turn the corner on figuring out what is the political strategy moving forward, because we need to figure it out, and it's also the window is opened, I feel like, and there's a realignment moment right now, and so we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to be able to address these kind of big, further challenges as they come up, including the whatever how COVID gets resolved. We have to figure that out, how we want to do it, not how it's being proposed to us, but how we might want to do it. Deal with the new realm of cyber 9/11, cyber Pearl Harbors, while putting on this whole missing piece on the table, and then try to turn the corner on an actual political strategy that may be able to grapple with all of this and more, which we need to do rapidly. So, all right, well, we'll keep at it as well we can. All right, thank you,
Definitely.
Greg.
Thank you again.
Thank you, everybody out there. Thanks for hanging out with us. And we'll record something else this week. All right, I'll play the outro. We'll bring the cartoons and the intros and stuff back another time soon. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yes, bye, everybody. AnteDote, we out.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We are against those thugs. Not Bone Thugs, but we are against those thugs.